The proceeding will start shortly.
The 8th of December.
It's the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, and this is our hearing into the economics of music streaming. We're going to be joined this morning by two panels. First of all, we have Maria Forte, Managing Director at Maria Forte Music Services Limited. We have Kwame Kwatan, Manager, Record Producer and Owner of Ferocious Talent. And Jose Luis Sevillano, Director General the AIE, the Artists, Interpretes o Ejecutantes. Before we start, I'm going to ask for any members to declare any interests. Kevin Brennan.
Yes, I'd like to declare that I'm a member of the Musicians Union and also members of the Ivors Academy, which represents songwriters and composers, and I receive occasional money for working as a musician.
Thank you. Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare that I'm also a member of the Musicians Union.
Thank you. So I just want to say good morning to our witnesses, Maria, Kwame and Jose. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just going to kick off with a sort of general question for all three of you, if you like. Just sort of jump in there and let me, whoever wants to answer it first. In our evidence session, our first one, I don't know if you saw it or not, we heard that streaming, when initially introduced, had made a really positive impact in the music industry. In fact, to such a degree that some artists suggested it almost saved the industry. But today, is streaming still a force for good? What impact is it having, positive and negative? And is the current revenue distribution structure fair? Who wants to go with that one?
All right, I'll do it.
Okay. Maria.
Okay, so yes, streaming is good, and it's been great for the business, for the industry, because the industry downloads were diminishing. After the album was fractured, and that people could buy just one track rather than a whole album. Things started definitely going, downhill. Piracy was rife. So streaming has basically, for the last 8 years, 10 years, has been growing and educating people that music is not free, that you can have a subscription service, pay for music, and which is a good thing, because piracy was not a good thing, and the whole Napster debacle was not good for the industry either. So it is good, but as time has gone on, and basically the industry has kind of shoehorned traditional agreements to traditional methodology into how streaming is dealt with, and that has not worked. And the result of that is that it's thrown up an inconsistency and an inequitable division of the royalties that emanate from that. So, for example, artists, which, having looked at the last two sessions, how artists feel about this. I would like to mention that something that has not been touched on yet is songwriters and publishers. And that is an equal right to recording. You don't have a recording without a song. And it's really important that songwriters are included in this whole process. Songwriters don't get enough either, and the publishers, by virtue of the fact that they administer those rights. And again, that has been through just morphing the physical world into the digital world. And it just doesn't fit. For a publisher to have 15% and a record label to have 55%, the economics of that does not work. And, with songwriters as well, it's not one writer, it can be several writers. And so the publishing pie gets even more diminished in a granular way. And so it makes even less for songwriters. So I can't remember what the last bit of your question was, but basically that's.
I just want to sort of expand on one point before I turn to the other panellists. Just when you mentioned about how effectively, I think what you described there is a sort of transposing of the old model of doing business, onto streaming and how that isn't working. Is that almost by, to a certain degree, accident, or is it design? Is it sort of like basically very convenient for those companies that are doing it?
I honestly, I think it wasn't design initially, but I do think there's a certain design now, especially on the artist side, because why would a stream be a royalty? I don't understand that. I mean, it's a license. It's like a sync license. 50% should go to the artist. I don't understand how the logic of applying a royalty to a stream it is happening. And, you know, less so with music publishing, because music publishing, the agreements work differently. The writers get the majority of, you know, so they'll have 75% or 80% of either a mechanical, and of a performance, they get 50% through their CMO. So the way that distribution happens is different, and also they get more of it than the artist. So there's two different arguments here, and they work differently.
Okay, thank you.
But we must never forget songwriters.
Okay, I'm going to just bring in Kwame and Jose at this point, just to sort of ask you guys where you think actually streaming is working. You know, in terms of economics, in terms of also consumer experience, frankly, and whether or not it's actually going to help in terms of a pipeline of talent. Kwame,
I think that. Sorry, Jose. I think that where Maria is right, definitely, is this thing of when streaming came along, it definitely nuked piracy, right? It came along and it gave us this new way that was very, very user-friendly, you know, and you could access a lot of content quickly. But again, to agree with Maria, we are years on now, and because I look at things through rose-tinted spectacles, I don't like to look at things and go, you know what, people deliberately did this in the beginning. I think that, so this whole thing of was it by design or, you know, I don't know. But I do know that we have got to, especially when it comes to writers, we've got to fix what Chris Cook calls the leaky pipe. And right now, there's royalty collection going on for writers that is going through 2 or 3 sets of hands before it gets back to writers. And I'm not just saying in this country, I'm saying, you know, collection outside of this country. That it needs looking at. We need, I've sometimes coined the term almost like a magnificent 7 to sit around a table. I say no more than 7 because I think any more than 7 and you can't get anything done. But we almost need one person from management, one person from artists, one person from live, one person from government, one person from, you know, to sit around the table and almost, and this will sound crazy, but Rolling Stone style, be locked in a room until you come out with a result. And when I say that, what I mean is the anecdote is that Mick Jagger back in the day was locked in his room. Himself and Keith were locked in the room until they came out with a song because they didn't want to write original material. Back then they were a covers band, right? And a similar kind of tactic has to be applied because this kind of constant sort of putting off of what is really, really urgent. It's so urgent right now. Writers are suffering. You know, as we say, they're losing half sometimes of their royalties, and it's as a state of affairs, it is crazy.
Okay. Can I bring Jose into that point? Jose?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us, especially the performers. Yeah, you asked about the fair distribution of the rights in the case of the streaming. I think. Yeah, if we go to the past, I think when the analogic, you say that the old model broadcasting decided and with the wrong convention at the rights, I know that this kind of rights that for performers, the lawmakers trying to distribute that money that comes from radios and televisions, etc. 50% for the labels, 50% for the performers. Yes. When we move this model of the traditional radio to the new one, that is the streaming, basically, because there is a big mistake about the streaming. Streaming is not replacing sales anymore. I think streaming is replacing broadcasting, and if you want, a kind of rental of music. Who can say that Netflix is more similar to an old blockbuster, or is similar to a shop where you can buy a film? It's a rental right. Then in both cases, if a streaming is communication to the public, or if it's a rental right, should be split 50-50 in the case if it's broadcasting. If it's rental, as you have in the UK, the rental right has an equitable remuneration, ER, that you say, for performers that they can manage on top of the contracts that they can sign, because the contracts not only cover the rights, also the image, and also other things. And now the contracts are properly for the relation between the labels and the performers. But on top of that, the performers should be able to manage their own rights. If you pay your attention, the performers are the only part of the music and even the audiovisual that they don't have a direct link with the user. Authors can negotiate directly with the publisher, labels, of course, but the performers, they don't have the possibility to negotiate their own rights. They cannot fix the price. They cannot negotiate in the terms that they want. And this is the situation. Talking about, do you say what is fair or not fair? Remember that 50% of one user or customer of Spotify goes to the labels, more than 50% of the money that they are paying. 30% remains at the platform, and less than 10% goes to the performers. And this is unbelievable. And if you try to see how the labels are distributing that money, I can tell you that they don't have accurate information, because most of the future performers that they have contracts, the contract has been lost during the change of selling contracts or sell or labels to this, to that. More than 2.5 billion US dollar was in black boxes last year. Is in the papers, in the newspapers. Last year, $2.5 billion in black boxes without identified the songwriters and the performers. And then that money remains in the label's account with no possibility to go to the performers. Then we need to use modern systems, as we have the collecting societies. You have in UK one of the most efficient collecting society for performers in the world, that is PPL. They are doing an incredible job. They can collect more than 200 million euros or pounds a year and distribute accurately to all the performers. And the last thing I want to say at the beginning, sorry to be so long, but is that the labels are only compensating the featured performers. But what about the musicians? You remember the directive? I know that maybe you are not now under the cover of the directive, but they say that the remuneration should be appropriate and proportionate to the actual potential economic value of the music. What about the session musicians? They are receiving zero, nothing from the streaming nowadays. Who is going to compensate that?
Thank you. Steve Bryan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome, everybody. The streaming platforms that we're talking about, they offer very similar services. I mean, they would all argue not, but essentially it does the same thing. And the prices are remarkably similar. And they haven't really changed an awful lot that I can remember in many years. Do you think this is because the market for this product is highly competitive and they're benchmarking against each other, or without talking to each other, or are there other factors in keeping the price down? You could start with that, maybe, Maria.
I think, of course, there is an element of competition, but you always have to remember that, they are competing with free, which is YouTube. People access YouTube to listen to albums and to listen to tracks that they want, and that is free to people, and that's what they're competing with. So, it is competitive between them, obviously, but and they do try, there are new services popping up all the time that are slightly different. And then you have to think, well, how is that going to get licensed? And how do we deal with that new bit? And it's an evolving thing all the time. But I think they need to keep their users. And in fact, with the Broken Record campaign, it's evident that users don't want to pay any more money. However, they would be prepared to pay a bit more if the money went to the artists and the writers. So I think there's probably a bit of leeway, but you don't want to shoot them down because, it'll just push more people to free, and that's always going to be the issue.
But they do want to pay more if they can feel warm and fuzzy about where the money goes. How would that work? The consumer.
Who's going to be? All right.
It's like people saying they don't want to pay more tax, but they're happy for someone else to pay it.
They don't want to. No. I don't. I mean, I think if it's well known that artists are not getting enough money to be able to live on, and the same goes for composers. And basically, I think if the messaging is very clear to the fan base, and an artist's fan base is very supportive of them. So if there was a differentiation between how they got remunerated, then the messaging, it would flow through and people would be more comfortable about the fact that they're paying $9.99 or $10.99, but that £1 is going, it's been changed. People have got to understand that, fans are they have an incredibly strong relationship with their artists, and many follow them around the world, well, pre-COVID, but it's a very strong relationship, and it's all about messaging and making sure that it's fair, because it's not fair at the moment.
Yeah, you say they're very loyal, but I mean, we talked about this the other day with our first session on this. It was Tom Gray from Gomez that I was asking this about, is that people are very loyal and they sort of do want to pay more to do the right thing. I agree with you, but then something comes along that's free, and there's an element of guilt that it's free, but the bottom line, it is free. And
but I don't think it should be free.
No,
that's the other thing.
Thanks. Kwame, what do you think the impacts of all this is on the pricing and the fact that it's unchanged on the music industry?
Hi. Wow. Okay, so yes, the market is competitive. And okay, in my room, for instance, I have platinum discs that I've done with major artists, but also I have, platinum discs and 50 million streamers that are independent, and are streamers of today. So I, as a manager, classically sit in both camps, but then at the same time, I was a performer as well. So the whole thing about the artist, the composer, the musician, the manager, being able to earn properly from what we have now in front of us, it is really important. Explaining and getting across to people all the time that with a great system, you will have a happier artist that once again are able to make a proper living from their art. Their art brings billions to the UK economy. Their art increases tourism. Their art means people in the UK, people view the UK differently. Their art means a youngster from Italy that went to Glastonbury at 16 and is now boss of a huge Fortune 500-ish company will remember that festival and give the UK an order for shipping of over £50 million a year and create 3,000 new jobs, right? Their art will make you and your kids dance around your living room, and their art will be there when your nearest and dearest pass away. Their art will lift you up when you need it, and their art will make you sing loudly at a football match. All of this is how important that group of people are. And mysteriously, right, they seem to have been left out of all of and when I say that, I mean the discussions. And I understand how that happened, but it's time to address it.
Yeah.
We've got an opportunity now to actually, and this is why I do harp on about it. We say, it's like, I keep saying, fix the leaky pipe. It's a thing that we at the MMF talk about a lot, right? But we really do. We've got to look at what's wrong and get to it. And if we do get to it, then people will be happy. And we've got happier artists. We're going to have great music. And if we have great music, all of those, I just gave you one example of 50 million quid coming into the UK. There are plenty of those. And when I say round table, I'm talking about, I say Magnificent Seven. The difference being it's got to be a diverse Magnificent Seven now. It can't be just men. Come on, right? It's management, MMF. It's got to be someone from the artist world. It's got to be a representative from maybe from the MU, one from the major label, one representing independence, AIM, one representing new tech, because we've got to have new tech in the room because they will tell us, right? One from live music representing venues and festivals. And they've got to sit in that room, and it can't be just a one-off meeting. This meeting has to happen twice a month, every month going forward, because that's how important it is. And I don't care, it has to be funded too, because that's how important it is. If those people keep looking at, because when I say this, it's an ongoing thing. It's so important, it's an ongoing thing. New tech is delivering, we've got Triller, we've got TikTok, we've got Insta, we've got Reels, it's delivering new things to us all the time. And every one of those new things needs somebody to look at it and say, hold on, are you paying this correctly? Are you paying that correctly? Are you paying this? And that all to filter back to musicians, composers, managers, artists. It's all got music companies, labels. It's all got to filter back correctly. So I'm not here to,
thank you. That's very clear, Mrs. Sevillano. And the from your point of view, what are the ways that you can enforce the copyright on behalf of the clients that you then represent?
Sorry?
You'll need to unmute yourself, sir.
Oh, Jose, I think it's
okay, it's back.
Much. Okay. Yeah, if I may, I will go to the previous answer question about the price. Because I think the market is competitive, and the price is according to the market. I think is enough for the music and the labels and the authors, and I think all the agents around the market, they say the same. The problem is that what you say is that some of music is for free, and then it's for free, and at the same time they are not paying the right amount that they should pay in the case of you mentioned previously, and this is called a value gap. But the double value gap that we call among the performers is the double value gap. Is there is a value gap for some platforms like YouTube, but there is a value gap in the distribution of that money that the streaming services they are receiving. Then I think the price is absolutely right, and maybe in future, as Netflix did in the past, we can increase that money when the piracy finally disappear and some other competitors they can put a price. But for the time being, I think is enough for establishing the market. The question is how to distribute that money and how we can arrive to the performers to that money.
Yeah, Maria. Just finally on you, I noticed in your in your biog that you worked with David Gedge of The Wedding Present, which I remember well in the early 90s. You remember in the early 90s when, am I right in saying that was the band that released a single every month throughout the year of 91, 92, something like that? The impacts of streaming and the economics of music streaming, would what they did in 91, 92, would that be worth it these days?
No, I mean, David Gedge is a good example because he still is active and he still is out there gigging and he's still releasing albums. I basically do all the PPL registrations for his label Scopitones. He now owns, he has his own label, he owns his own masters of new material. I've re-aggregated all his publishing, so now he controls that entirely himself. And I help administer that. But, you know, we're coming up to a 30-year anniversary. He's had a few 30-year anniversaries now of albums, and they were seminal albums that were released in the 80s and 90s. And he won't see any money from that because they're old, they're old record deal agreements. And there's a case for breakage. You know, I mean, I do read royalty statements from time to time because I find them fascinating. And, you know, I don't understand how breakage can be applied. I know it's in his contract, but how can it be applied to streaming? And he won't see any money because he's an indie artist. And, you know, the way the pot is carved up, it's on a pro rata basis. So, you know, if he sees any money, it will be so minimal. It won't be something that makes a huge amount of difference to the income he enjoys through his career, which is mostly from live now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me that was 30 years ago on the on the day that it was 40 years that we lost John Lennon as well, which should be put on the record. Thank you, Chair.
I was very interested by Kwame, very, very colourful image of fixing the leaky pipe and the Magnificent Seven and what have you in terms of trying to sort of get a new sort of deal for the music industry and would benefit songwriters and artists. Just to play devil's advocate for a moment, why should record companies and streaming actually do that? Because there's no shortage of people lining up in order to make music. So why is the motivation for them in terms of frankly fixing a leaky pipe?
Because if they don't, tech has a very, very, very good way of bypassing, right? If you let's look at it. When people needed to access music really, really quickly, what came along? Piracy came along, okay? We have a problem, and the problem is artists really, and fans do want to be paying artists and making sure they can live so that they can go to their gigs, etc. If forever there's this murky water, as I say, I use the other analogy I use is Optrex and eyes, you know, if you can't quite see, then, and somebody else comes along, right, with an opportunity that actually, you know what, removes loads of middle people, okay? What will happen is people will take that as a route forward. And we'll be sat here in another 5 years going, hold on, how do we regulate that? But this time, tech will have sought a way around it that, you know, who knows? Artists might say, do you know what, forget it. I'm going to deregulate. I'm not going to be a member of this and a member of that and a member of that. I'll just come out of it and I'll deal directly. You know, this is why we've got to actually, you know, it's 2020. 2020 has removed the Band-Aid, you know, literally, and you're looking at open wounds, right? And you've got to sit there and go, we've got to dress this. We've got to dress the wound correctly so that it fixes, so that when we go forward, okay, it's okay. And artists and managers and labels and streaming services all feel okay. But there needs to be real clarity, real honesty, real transparency. You don't have that, then people will find another way. And I've been in the business 33 years, okay? I've seen this a few times. When organizations don't listen and don't hear when things like this go on, another way is found, and everybody all of a sudden is going, oh my God, Napster's come along. Oh my God, it's iTunes. Oh my God. And it's like, don't say we didn't warn you. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Thank you. Damien Hines?
Thanks, Julian. I just want to pick up where Steve left off on pricing and on copyright. And we've talked a lot in this inquiry so far about how revenues are divvied up and how they should be divvied up. But can we just talk for a minute about the amount of revenue before how it gets divided? Maria, we know that the record industry is growing. New markets are growing the whole time. But what about old markets? Do we know how much the $9.99 on Spotify, how much does that compare to what the typical music fan would have spent on CDs or on downloads?
Well, it would. It doesn't equate as much. I did do a bit of a ready reckoner here, actually, strangely, because in the heyday, an album was I can't remember how much vinyl cost, to be honest, but CDs, although I should do because I did buy vinyl. CDs, £15 a pop. So you're talking about a dealer price of maybe 10 or 11 maybe, and 8.5% of dealer. This is on publishing, and then that would be divided. We take tax out of it, but it would be divided between the songs on that album on a pro rata timing basis, and then so that's how it would kind of waterfall out. So when you then got to iTunes and downloads, you could download a whole album. You're talking about 8%, but that was a whole album, and again split between tracks. But then when it became, sort of divorced, you could divorce tracks from the main album. Then you're talking about 99p or 79p. So it's constantly diminishing.
Just as an aside, by the way, this isn't fundamental to our inquiry, but why didn't the industry differentiate more on price for downloads? Why was there no difference?
There was a copyright.
Go on.
There was a copyright tribunal.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. Sorry, come back to where you were. So I think CDs probably peaked at 15.
Yes.
I think for much of their life, they're more like 10, 11, 12.
On retail.
At retail. How many does the average punter buy in the year? That's really the question.
What, now of old?
No.
In those days.
What I'm trying to get to by this circuitous route is the total amount of money available to be divvied up greater than, less than, or the same as it used to be? Setting aside China and Vietnam and all those huge growth markets, but on a like-for-like basis, is there more money in this business to be divvied up? And I know you're going to say in a minute, quite rightly, that the cost structure has changed a lot too, which would be interesting to hear. But just at the revenue line, are punters spending more money on music today or less money on music?
I think they're spending less because it's an all-you-can-eat basis. So you pay your $9.99 and that's it. But in the old days, or days gone by, I don't know about the word old days, but you bought an album, you bought another album, you bought a 10-inch single, a 12-inch single, a picture disc. There was a lot more product.
The 12-inch single.
And now it's you pay a monthly sum and you get what you want. You get whatever you want.
Do these numbers exist? I mean, is it somewhere known how much?
I don't know.
So taking a like-for-like basis in a market like the UK or the US, Jose, you were going to come in.
Yeah, I think these numbers never appears. In fact, we have a case in Spain with some record labels against the platforms, and never the judge said that there was not evidence about the distribution of the money in the case of the new models. But I would like to pay your attention in the case of the Spanish government that recognize this problem that you say, that how, if the money is enough or not, and how should divide it. And in fact, our studies say that, of course, there is room for different distribution. The amount of the total market is almost the same that we have before, and even will grow very, very sharply in the next years. But you know that in Spain we have a collective managed equitable remuneration for the performers, and that we collect, the AIE, the Collecting Society for Performers in Spain, on top of the contracts and all the relations between the contracts and the labels and the performers, and that we are managing these rights, and the music services pay directly to AIE for performers. Okay, we get the information of the users in Spain of all the music that is used by the platforms, and then we distribute that money quarterly to all the performers, not only future performers but also the session musicians, and we pay through the world with our 99 bilateral agreements. Even we are paying to PPL, for instance, for the British performers, or the remuneration that is collected here in Spain. And I think this is very good to demonstrate that you can rebalance the situation.
I don't want to cut you off, but I think we're going to come back later in the session to all those distributive issues.
Mm-hmm.
Maria, can I come back to you for now? I mean, you do get quite a lot for your $9.99. If you're on one of these free offers, I mean, you get all part of Amazon Prime or something. I mean, you get even more, don't you?
And Apple TV Plus, because they've done Apple Music now, so it's bundled.
So why do you all put up with that? I mean, aren't you collectively, and this isn't just artists or just composers, it's labels, as well as everybody, funding the marketing expansion of these labels? And to come back to Kwame's point, I mean, whether it ultimately is Spotify or someone else, eventually in all markets, you get disintermediation, and people realize there's a way to take more of the value chain. Isn't this industry just enabling that happening?
Look, I don't think we've reached streaming numbers yet. I think we're still on an upward curve. There's a huge demographic that hasn't really been included in this streaming thing. I mean, it's a lot of young people, who are tech savvy are engaging with streaming, but the older generation, less so. And, there are new services. There's one in particular that I know, which is putting a streaming services through television, so people feel more comfortable to be able to access it rather than computers. And, it's a matter of engaging a greater audience to make, more money. It's as Freddie Laker used to say, it's bums on seats. You've got to get more people, you've got to get more people using streaming, but this is the important factor, is you've got to make sure that what comes out the other end is equally distributed and fairly distributed. These streaming numbers are large as far as we're concerned, because we're looking at a previous marketplace, but they're not. It's got to get bigger, and it's going to get bigger. So it's bundled. It's all part of making more money ultimately. And, Apple's very powerful when it comes to negotiation. These are tough negotiations that happen.
Kwame.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that in order to get past piracy, we needed streaming to win. You got to think back to the time. We needed streaming to win. So that was the only way. Now, the simple thing here is, and I agree with a lot of what Maria said, is in going forward, we've just got to make sure that, whichever way it happens. I'm listening to Jose and he's talking about ER, and I'm saying good, but even with that, we've got to make sure that the people that at the moment are collecting, because they are label owners themselves, as in artists, and there are many artists now. I have quite a few that own their own masters, that they aren't affected or suffer. It has to be that everybody wins going forward, but this can happen. And again, I'd go a bit easier on the I'd say, why are we all putting up with it? Well, we're here and we're talking to you because, you know what, there's a need for us to sort it out, you know, it can be sorted out.
And let me ask you about that negotiating dynamic. So, as we understand it, the record labels negotiate with the streaming services and then the record labels kind of disperse funds through the chain, and the complaint is that there's not enough going to the artist, there's not enough going to the composer. Obviously, as well as the big record labels, there are independents. So I just wonder what your assessment is of what's the barrier to entry that's stopping new entrants into this market, and what's the fundamental tipping point at which you say, as an artist, I'm going to go to an independent. What do you lose as a result of going to an independent? And finally, would the world just be a better place, and would things be different if the big record labels were broken up?
Okay, you're going to have to give me one question at a time, and then I'll answer each one really quick.
You can choose, Kwame. You can choose.
Okay, give me the question again, and I'll do it.
It's about the negotiating. I mean, I suppose that the simpler version of that question is, in the negotiating dynamic with the streaming platforms, what structure of the industry would end up with a better result for the artist and the composer and the rest of the Magnificent Seven?
What structure, or what's the way to fix it?
I'm asking what structure, because it's difficult to specify, to stipulate a way that two people should negotiate in a negotiation, but you can say who should be the people who should be doing the negotiating. So the question is there an endemic flaw in the structure of the business, because it's too hard for independents to grow, it's too hard for artists to choose to go to independence, it's too hard for new record labels to come in who could offer a better deal to artists and therefore be more attractive? That's the question.
I don't know. I just think, I don't know if it's as simple as, you know what, I don't know. I'm really not even sure if I understand the question, because in a way, I'm going, are you asking, is there a way to negotiate better? If so, as I've said, I think sitting sets of people around a table and then discussing it going forward is definitely the way forward. Will artists, just having trouble understanding the question, because you give me about 3-4 different ways. Give me one more and I'll get it.
Okay, yeah. So among all the people taking money out of this equation is the streaming platform itself.
Yeah.
And it strikes me as rather a high proportion of the total. That is a matter of negotiation, as we understand it, between the streaming platforms and the record labels in negotiation. What would make more of that money available for distribution through the chain? Or maybe I'm making no sense. Does anybody else want to?
I get it.
Okay.
It's just not that black and white. It just isn't. And it really, this is the thing, the streaming services are getting all the money, or, the streaming services are getting all of the money. The major labels are getting all the money. It's just not that simple. It's a thing whereby people we tried to fix one problem, and streaming did really well by basically nixing, piracy. But in doing that, as often happens, another problem's come. And so it's ongoing. And we have to look at it and look at where we are now. Because don't forget, there are many things that have come about now, right, that weren't around when £9.99 or £14 was around. Social media for one, you know what I mean? So this is the thing. There are so many more things to take into consideration now. And so we've got to look at those now. And we can't just look at it as one meeting and done. We have to keep looking at it. I don't care if there's a paid force. And this is why I'm saying this Magnificent Seven round table. that sits there every 2 weeks and basically just goes, okay, how can the UK win with regards?
Okay. Thank you. Final question, me, or the chairman will get very impatient with me. Can I just come to Maria and Jose and just say, are you both content with the way that the negotiation is done in terms of the share of revenue that goes to the streaming platform, and indeed what the headline price is to the user? Or do you think a different market, a different negotiating dynamic, different structure in the industry would result in something more advantageous for artists and composers?
I can tell you that in the last more than 10 years, we are trying to fix the negotiation with the labels on behalf of the performers, trying to rearrange or rebalance the distribution. I think this is not impossible negotiation, because there are many things in the middle of the battle, if you can say that, and the performers and the producers are not able to find a common agreement, because of course the producers or the labels, they have now the direct link, and they have the money, and then when you have the money, you cannot split that money if you feel that you need to survive or whatever you want. But the only change, you say, that how to start a new negotiation or different way is trying to give the floor to the performers, and the performers have the right to go directly to the platforms with equitable remuneration or whatever you can call it. And the case is that if you can give this right directly to the performers, they can negotiate and they can get a fair remuneration for all their job. I think is the only way that we are seeing in Europe and the rest of the countries. Now in Holland, they have for the visual, in Switzerland, in Hungary, in other countries, they are looking for these kind of solutions, because otherwise there will not be a peace in the market in the next 10 years. And the performers, finally, they will lose the possibility to stay in the market. Yeah.
Thank you. Maria.
I would like to say it's something that probably wasn't what you were intending, but when it comes to negotiation, the major labels are obviously the first port of call because they have the biggest catalogues. Aligned to them are obviously their major, their publishing arm, and whether or not they do a deal together or separately, or there is a joining of the whole licensing push, but the independent labels and the people that sit outside of that, they're not independent labels, independent labels, and publishers, often a digital service will come along, they'll do their deal with the major label, they get their 55 million tracks that arrive, and then they talk about a publishing deal. And it's too late. So you've got streaming services going live without the correct agreements in place. So that adds a dynamic that nobody really wants, because you want to license them, but equally, and so you lose ground. And I think that is a really key point, that no one should be launching without the correct agreements in place, because then that means delayed distributions. It means all sorts of things. And I think it's a key point. It needs to be addressed in this mix.
Thank you.
Thank you. Clive Efford.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Maria, can you take us through what the traditional role of publishers has been in the music making process in the past, and how that's been impacted by streaming? And if I can add to that, just how that's affected independent publishers in particular.
When you say that, what do you mean the process?
Well, in the process of that you're involved in bringing music to the public. So what has been your role traditionally in that, and how has that changed by streaming? Well,
my role personally has been on what I call the nuts and bolts side. So my position in any publishing entity that I've worked in, and now as my own independent consultant, is to protect the rights of the composers that I work with and the artists. But, so in the old days, you would it was a lot simpler to license recordings of an album or a single. They were static things; they didn't change. Now these days, with basically collecting and distributing on a streaming service, it's extremely complicated. Not least because often the metadata is just incomprehensible, and you don't know. The CMOs who license streaming services can sometimes receive data that is not possible to even process. So there's a delay in that. The metadata is not good enough for them to even identify the songs that are actually coming through in royalty income. And I mean, I don't know whether you're going to talk about metadata, but anybody who knows me will be raising their eyes at this point. Metadata is so important in this whole mix that people get paid properly, because without that, digital services can't actually account to the CMOs that they have to in order for writers to get paid. The metadata goes from the label to the digital service attached to the assets. So the artwork, the music, and then the metadata. Those are the three key pieces that go together to the digital service. In that metadata, you identify each of the songs, and you should identify the composers. Some labels identify composers, some don't, which means that the ones that don't, when it goes through to the digital service can only push what it's received. And so the copyright societies, it's very difficult. They're then trying to identify songs from a record company identifier. And this has been historically, there have been two separate businesses, the record side and the publishing side. And until now, they haven't really worked together in kind of fusing the data that they use. And that's what's happening at the moment. But it's very late in the day. It's extremely complicated because you can have one song with multiple recordings. And, so this is a problem when it has to come out the other end. It's knowing, have you been paid correctly? Have you been paid for the right songs, the right composers? And it's much more fragmented now and much more difficult, as well as the fact that there are billions of streams. So you're dealing with huge amounts of data, whereas before you weren't. So that's the difference.
And do you as a publisher have a role? So I'll come to you, Jose, but I just wanted to follow up and say, do you as a publisher have a role in untangling that?
Yes, I do. I sit on various committees, or I have done. I was a founding member of IMPEL, which is the Independent Music Publishers e-licensing body, and it's basically it's incredible. I don't want to make it sound that it's unfixable, because it isn't unfixable. What will fix it is the metadata, and metadata really matters, and that's something that everybody needs to come to the table with and fix, because then the flow of income will be much more accurate.
And in terms of a fix for that, is that what are the roadblocks to fixing it?
I think it should be compulsory that record companies supply song data and writer information. The writer information is key, and not just of they are doing it much more so these days. Not all labels, but it's the back catalogue. There has to be a big process of going back over the back catalogue and adding those composers, because it's been much more of a forward movement rather than a backward movement. When we were aware that this had to happen.
And just a final point on that issue. So what will make the record labels do that?
Well, I've had conversations, and I'm not saying it was a major label, independent label, with a label in one of the kind of seminars that I do about metadata, because it's very close to my heart. And And, I said record labels need to apply composer information. And somebody piped up, well, I don't really care about composer information because it's nothing to do with me. I'm not changing my system to do that. And my view is, many artists are also composers of their own material. So I think it's not morally correct that you would want to obstruct an income flow by not putting that on there. So, I think it needs to be, I don't think we can rest entirely with record labels having to do this mammoth job, because it would be. You're talking about digitizing paper records. But the data is there. I read label copy because I find it fascinating. It has the composer information, it'll have the engineers, the producers, the featured artists, the non-featured artists. It's just really interesting. But I think maybe it's something that the industry needs to work on together and fund together in order to be able to get some of these blockages out of the way.
And I'll come to Jose because I know he wanted to come in, but just, it is the fact that the record labels have 5% of publishing. Is that part of the blockage? Is that a problem?
It's a problem because artists aren't earning enough money from it, because it's not coming. They're getting their 55%. Yes, that's a problem because not even half of 55% is coming through to the artist. And, that is the biggest problem of all, because artists are not going to be able to work. Songwriters are not going to be able to create songs. People have to earn a living. They're going to go out and be Deliveroo drivers. That's shocking.
Thank you. Jose.
Yeah, well, I think the CMOs, as say Maria, we used to deal with difficult sources of information, especially from broadcasting, public performance in the past, and television even. But I have to tell you that after the last 10 years, the evolution of the databases of the CMOs, of the collecting societies, PPL or PRS in your case, in UK, they are working very hard in creating these databases that they can manage, or they can digest all the information from the platforms. In fact, I can tell you that in our case, we can process more easily the information from Spotify than the information that comes from terrestrial broadcasters by far. Then we can distribute not only the current catalog, but the back catalog. We have the information from the 50s, 60s, 70s, all this information, the lineups, and then is distributable as very, very fastly. Then I think, and the link with the two codes that are very important in this matter, that is ISRC code, that is for recording, and ISWC for the work, is every day is more linked. And then I think the most efficient way to distribute huge amount of money or huge amount of information from the platforms on YouTube or wherever is through the collecting societies. They have the full databases with all the identification process reliable.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Jose, earlier I think you mentioned that money comes from the equitable remuneration right in Spain to the UK via PPL. How much money would come each year to the UK from Spain as a result of that right existing there?
Well, it's about 15 or a little bit less, 13%. Depends on the amount of music, because
someone told me it was about £800,000. Is that right? Right ballpark figure?
A year?
Yeah.
Per year? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about it, that's quite a significant amount of money, isn't it? And if this right existed, across, for example, the European Union or in other countries as well, potentially, given the UK's strength in the music industry, it could actually be a very significant earner for UK-based musicians coming through PPL, couldn't it?
I can tell you that PPL, for instance, in all models of broadcasting, public performance, etc., they are collecting more than 50 50 million pounds a year for music, for British music.
Okay.
Then I think if this right exists around the world, and I think is finally stabilized in the world, I think we'll collect a big amount of money for the British musician, because they are one of the biggest markets in the world.
Do you think equitable remuneration might be the simplest and quickest way to actually get some money, if I put it this way, in crude terms, out of corporate pockets and into the pockets of the working class?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the most reliable system to put, because you know that we are used to negotiating on behalf of performers the price, to fix tariffs, to negotiate, to distribute. We have the database, the information, and it is very fast. As we got agreement with Spotify, the last one, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and immediately we start to distribute to the performers. And we are paying every year more than, let me check, but more than 7,000 performers a year.
Okay.
Most of them, 45,000, are session musicians that nobody pays apart from this equitable remuneration.
Okay, thanks for that. And we mentioned earlier on, you mentioned earlier on, $2.5 billion in what's called black boxes in the industry. I mean, and basically for the benefit of the committee, what you're talking about there is basically money that can't be attributed. Is that correct? To for some reason or other to artists or songwriters and composers, etc.
Yeah, that means there was the digital music news, I think, 1 year ago. Yeah.
And this is also the same thing as the so-called leaky pipe that Kwame was mentioning as well. Is it? It's just basically the money flows out the leaky pipe into the black box. What is it? Would it be quite easy to fix that, or instead of it being kept by the record companies, perhaps should thought be given perhaps of creating a fund out of that, which could go towards maybe up and coming, new talent that's coming up through the industry, or perhaps towards some of those who've been in the industry for a long time but aren't getting much out of the pot. What do you think about that?
I think it's easier.
Sorry, go on, Jose. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easier to make clarity, if you want to say that, with the money for performers. But I think if you try to fix this problem with the labels, I think we can manage and we can do it. I think between the publisher, CMOs, authors, performers, we are able to manage this.
So it's doable. Yeah, Maria.
Yep.
I just wanted to say a couple of things on that. First of all, equitable remuneration, yes, it would be very good if that money went directly through CMO, which is PPL in our country, who have a very good methodology, and they also would, so it's featured artists and non-featured artists. That's the important thing here. If there was massive resistance against that, then, and it has to go through the labels, for example, the rate needs to change. It needs to be a 50-50 license rate and not a royalty rate.
Okay,
so that's
understood.
The first thing I want to say. The second thing was black box. You do hold, CMOs do hold black boxes, but then they are dispersed after a period of time. And PPL they will hold the money for 6 years, and then it's basically paid out on a pro rata basis to the members.
Okay. Jose, just to jump back to you for 1 second, am I right in saying that in Spain the equitable remuneration right actually is not 50-50 but 100% to the musicians, or is that wrong?
Yeah, it's on top of the contract. It's not split with the labels. It's only for performers. In the law, it's recognized in that way.
Okay.
And then we negotiate directly on behalf of the performers.
Okay.
And the labels, they have their own way to receive some money. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not 50-50 in that case. Yeah.
Thanks. That's interesting to know. Kwame, could I just ask you about the black box issue which you raised in relation to the leaky pipe and so on? Is that something that as managers you're ever able to get your hands on some of that money for your artists? Is that part of a negotiation ever with record labels where you go to them and say, we know you've got this black box money, how about giving that to some of our artists? Does that happen?
Well,
the thing is, black box represents so many different pools of income. So it's not something that sort of sits in the sky that is necessarily just record label. Sometimes an artist, and again, this is also part of the problem, sometimes an artist doesn't know to register, themselves correctly, PPL-wise or,
right.
Whatever. And so as a result, what happens is their income is sat there. And if they do not, and I've got experience of this, I've saved one guy who, and all I'll say is, from me advising him and looking after him over a certain amount of time, he earned over 100,000 just by signing forms correctly.
Which probably is not uncommon, because artists don't, don't think about this as the first thing they're thinking about when they get up in the morning. They're probably thinking about writing a song, maybe. My question really was, though, do managers, though, ever go to a record company? I understand what you did there was an amazingly tremendous service for that artist, but do managers ever go to record companies and say, we know this money exists, it's been reported publicly at $2.5 billion across the industry. Do they ever go to the record company and say, give us a slice of that for our artists, even if you can't attribute it, at least we can give it to some of our artists? Does that ever happen?
No, I've never gone, because again, we are, as managers, just being completely real here, as managers, we are sort of in a tunnel that is very much like, okay, we have to earn for our artists. And I know it sounds kind of crazy. It sounds like, well, surely if that money's there, you should go and access it.
I know that there's some questions coming up about what the manager's role is now, so I won't go on into that too much, because there's further questions which other colleagues are going to ask about it. But one question is some people have been a bit critical sometimes of the Music Managers Forum for having a close relationship with Spotify and YouTube and so on in terms of finances. What would your response be to that criticism?
Nah. I mean, the MMF, I mean, we give as much as we get. And when I say that, I mean, you can be sponsored by somebody, but you can disagree wholeheartedly with something. I don't buy that at all.
Okay.
At all. I think that, and we do quite often, and, Spotify will come around and they'll say, okay, you disagree with us on that, and we have to have a look at that. We believe that actually by being close to them, that actually we might be able to influence, change there. It's no use not having a discussion with someone. It's kind of, that's kind of Cold War. And we're past that.
Okay, Maria, can I ask you a couple of questions quickly? You mentioned earlier on about, other sorts of streaming services were mentioned earlier on, like Netflix, which obviously show, high-end television content and films, etc. Why is it that pretty much all the big streaming services in music offer exactly the same product? In Netflix, you don't have all the same films as you can access on Amazon Prime or other streaming services. Why is music different, do you think?
I think it's what record labels deliver. They deliver their entire catalogue, and they deliver it to every streaming service because they want to maximise on the availability of that catalogue.
So what we were talking about earlier on...
Not everybody uses the same subscription service. I mean, I have Spotify, and I know the people who have Spotify and Amazon Music. Not Amazon, Apple Music.
Sure.
But you're maximising the availability of your catalogue.
So just to follow up on the questions, Maria, that were asked earlier on by Damien
I did want to mention
and Steve Prime. I'll just press you on this and then come back and mention what you like. The point I'm trying to make is that what you've just said is that the reason for that, the question that was asked earlier on, why everybody offers the same thing at the same price, is because that's what the record labels require of those major streaming services, that everything is available universally, and in effect that means that they can't differentiate the products that they offer except in the most minor way.
Well, no, I wouldn't say playlists are minor, or Spotify basically including credits. Then they were the first to it, and other now digital services are also showing the credits. being able to search by composer, that's something that's coming. And then all these things and nuances of a service, they're trying to make their service different to basically attract the consumers.
On the pricing side, what you were talking about earlier on about older consumers, and that is changing, isn't it, quite rapidly, and that older people like me, for example, are subscribers to Spotify. Is there a possibility that some of those older, that the reason given often for the price being kept at the same nominal price for the last decade or more, at $9.99, is that there was a very high level of price elasticity amongst young consumers, if you want to put it that way, in economics terms. But older consumers are more likely, are they not, to be willing to pay a bit more? Is that something that could be used to try and generate more revenue?
Well, potentially, but it's kind of like adding a tax on old people, isn't it? I mean, you saying giving a greater price to older people,
or perhaps offering a differentiated service of some kind for them. Anyway,
possibly a differentiated service, but playlists. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I have had Spotify for a long time. I still listen to Spotify. I listen to albums because I'm old-fashioned. To me, that's albums have been created as a body of works, and that's how I always listen to an album. But I have a son who has endless playlists, and he won't leave Spotify because he doesn't want to have to lose his playlist. So it's interesting. That sort of. I did want to say about Black Box though, which is in publishing agreements. It's in standard current publishing agreements. Black box is usually a black box clause in there that it will be distributed on a pro rata basis with the catalogue to the composers. There is a split of black box in a publishing contract. So okay. I just want to make that clear. Okay.
Can I just ask you? You did mention earlier on about the way the publishing pie is sort of more and more being divided up. I think we've all noticed a trend in recent years, certainly if you ever attend the IVAs, that you at one point have 12 people on the stage claiming all to have written the same song. Can you just explain, for the benefit of the committee and perhaps people who might not be aware of this trend, what's going on there?
Well, there's a number of things actually. I mean, the easiest explanation is firstly, sampling is quite prevalent, and when you sample a song and you give up a share of the copyright, you've immediately got the songwriters of that sampled song in your song. So that can be a way in which suddenly you get 17 songwriters, and then there's the way somebody can write a song, and then the producer, who is a producer-writer, will get it, and they add bits to it, and there can be a number of people in the room who will be given a percentage, and then often, if it's a major artist, they will require a percentage of the song, irrespective of whether or not they contributed to it.
Right. So it's just the old maxim of add a word, take a third on stilts, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Dolly Parton didn't give Elvis a part of her song.
Wise woman. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Julie Elliott. Thank you, Chair. I want to move on to the role of managers. Kwame, we heard in our last session quite a bit from artists about how the advent of streaming had changed their lives and the way they work and the impact it had had. I'm very interested to hear how the role of managers has changed with the impact of streaming, and also how it's affected your approach to negotiations with record companies, record labels, and also how you ensure you always get the best deal given the impact of streaming.
Well, okay.
Just a few things.
Thank you. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so management. Interesting. I know old managers, and they will often tell me about what it was like. And there are many similarities, but then there are many differences. So, for instance, now, a manager has to deal with, amongst other things, A&R, because we're called on to help make the record now. with the artist, advise them through the process early on, because artists are no longer, I guess, I'll put it this way, the artist's early time on working on a record is without funding from a major record label or an indie. Generally, you almost go at it as though you're self-releasing. So that's the first thing. So now A&R, deal making, new tech, social media. I know management companies now that have got a whole social media department, touring, obviously, which was back then, but is now. You've got brand deals now as well because of social media. So, and navigating that, which again, we're talking back in the day, wasn't email. Now, obviously there is. So people can reach you easier, which is great, but people can reach you easier, which is awful as well, because your inbox is, if you are having a hit record, any one of these, right? If you're having a hit record, your inbox can go from, 150 to 200 emails a day to maybe 600 in a day, So then you've got to employ somebody to help sift through that so that you get the most important ones. Artist care, mental health right now, obviously as well, it's a huge thing. So what we're saying is, putting it simply, an artist manager does have to do a lot, and arguably a lot more now because of what is in front of us, and also the simple truth is because many artists can upload themselves to any of the streaming services. In order for your artist to cut through, you simply have to do that much more work. I would say back in the day, you would have to, the sieving process was that you would have to get a deal first, which meant that there were a lot of people that didn't get through that net. Now, I'm not saying it's good, right, wrong. I'm saying that now, most people can do a song at home, in their bedroom, upload it or get it uploaded, and then worry about how to either collect it or whatever, without even a manager. So your job and the basket of the suite of things that you have to do is that much larger. Definitely. And I would say that having been a manager for over 15 years, I would say what I used to have to do and what I have to have in place now are completely different. And by the way, that is including making sure that, royalty-wise, my artist is every last thing has been looked at because of the very things that we're talking about. So the leaky pipes, etc. We have to follow up on all that.
Okay, thank you, Kwame. Julie Elliott, your next question.
Yeah, can I want to follow on that. We heard a lot about transparency and lack of transparency at the last session. Do you feel that people, the streaming services, record labels, collecting societies, etc., give you enough information and things are transparent enough to ensure you to advise your clients as effectively as possible?
I don't think there's transparency all round, and that's not me dodging the question against streaming services. I just think that transparency is a major issue.
And finally, COVID's affected everyone this year, and music managers are usually paid on commission. How's COVID impacted managers and the rest of an art support system specifically, and what support has been available to you through this period?
Okay, how has COVID affected me? All right, so I had COVID. I was in hospital with COVID. And how has it affected me? Well, if you're self-employed as a manager, then you have to kind of make sure, someone at the door, can you believe it? You have to make sure, hold on, one sec, I can't, what can I do? Okay, you just have to make sure that,
how have you been paid? Have you had the support you needed in terms of pay?
I'm lucky in that many of my artists stream well. So I'm lucky in that many of my artists stream well, so I do get paid from that.
And what support have government given you any support during this period?
They have definitely.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you, Julie. Damien Green.
I was about to ask Kwame a question, but he's got to go and answer the door. But again, I'll pick this up with Maria then, because I wanted to follow up something Kwame said earlier on, where he said that we're spending this inquiry thinking about the distribution of the money available and how little of it actually gets to artists and songwriters, and that if the labels don't sort this out, then Kwame said tech would take over, which gives rise to the thought: why haven't we already? Why don't Apple, Amazon, Google, money no object? They could run hit-driven industries because they can afford it. Why don't they just approach the artist direct and disintermediate? Just take out, even these giant, big record labels. So Maria, have a go at that.
Artists are signed to labels. I mean, you would have to re-engineer the whole wheel basically, because you would then be signing artists directly yourself, or I suppose you could have artists delivering songs to you, but you'd still have to have a contract. And do Apple want to do that? No, they want to sell products. They're not even, the only reason they're in music or streaming or no downloads anymore is to sell more of their tech products. So they could, but then I just don't think that's the business that they want to be in.
Okay, well, I'll put the question to Kwame again, since it was originally meant to. I was picking up something you said earlier about how if you don't sort out this issue, then tech will take over. And I suppose, well, presumably you as a manager, have you ever thought, okay, I could cut all these labels I have to deal with. Why don't I go direct to the big tech boys and say, why don't you basically set up your label or buy one of the labels or something like that, and then cut out a whole raft of middlemen who are taking money out of the system? Have you ever thought of doing that?
I have artists, as I said, my main core business before managerially with artists was with major record labels. I have one artist now with a major record label, and the rest of my roster self-releases. Some self-release because they're not ready yet. Others self-release because actually they prefer it as a way forward. So what you're talking about, I'm already involved in and already have success on my wall as a result of it. So I'm in that system. Yeah.
And what makes you decide to walk away from contract negotiations with a label and say it's more beneficial to go independent? I mean, is it just money?
Hold on 1 second. Can you just ask that one again?
Sorry, I was saying, what's the decision for you about whether you say to an artist, or you get an artist with a made label, or whether you self-release, as you put it? Is it just money, or are there other factors?
No. Major label is because you've got, to me, a major label act. Okay, if you've got an act that is definitely suited towards a major label, then yeah, to me, I think, yeah, correct. One thing I want to go back on that Julie asked me earlier about managers. She was saying, have the government earned, have you earned from, has the government supported you? And I wanted to just tie this into what you're saying here. A lot of managers have suffered it hugely, obviously, because live music has been completely hit on the head and is suffering hugely. And this is I can't even express. Sure, my earnings have been affected by that. I was a little distracted because people were banging on the window, so I just wanted to get that out. Now, Damien, I want to go back to your point. Give me question one more time and I'll finish it off.
It was what you say that you put some acts on labels and some acts self-release. What makes the decision for you?
What makes the decision is the artist. Some artists, I look at, my friend manages Dua Lipa. Dua Lipa to me is a major artist, right? I have some acts that I think are major label. I manage Blue Lab Beats. Blue Lab Beats are just signed to Blue Note Records. Blue Note Records, to me, seems to be the right label for Blue Lab Beats. Okay, they're ready now, but they're ready because they've done 2 albums before and 3 EPs on independence. Do you see what I mean? So they've had their time. What would have happened perhaps in the 1960s where people would have gone, done the whole touring circuit, toured. We have to remember the Beatles didn't just emerge. They did 7 years, as we know, Hamburg, blah, this, that, X, Y, Z, and then they were ready. So to me, sometimes it's a matter of being ready for a major record label, and some artists just aren't ready for a major record label deal. And the ones that come to me and say, I am, and I really want, and I recognize that they aren't, I'll often, and I've done that this year, just say, do you know what? I'm the wrong manager for you.
Okay.
Maria. Yeah, I was going to say that major labels are very good at doing what they do, which is they have a big kind of a system. The expenditure on a major label artist is enormous, because there's videos that have to be made. There's they organize the kind of press, the promotions, the marketing. It's a big vehicle surrounding Dua Lipa. Look at her videos, look at, arranging all, interviews, getting her to the right people. It's expensive. And so, if you have a major label artist, then, it's, or somebody who like her, who it was evident right from the start of her career that, she was a star, and has to have a vehicle that is going to basically take her through the business and sell her.
And also, just to back up on there, sure, look, major label deals, your percentages will be lower, but then at the same time, the way that you look at it as a manager is your percentage will be lower, and the percentage coming to you and your artist will be lower, but the amount they then put into you, that's if it works. You have to remember that. If it works, the amount that they put into you, it will almost sort of teletransport you to a kind of a new level. And that new level has many other ways of earning. You have brand deals, you have, as I say, there's sponsorships, there's etc., which some major labels try and, get a piece of, and others these days actually say, no, that's yours to deal with. So there are different ways of earning now.
Thank you for that response. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And as we all know, this session is being live streamed. So I'd like to read out something that Colin Smith, who is a musician watching the streaming, has said. He said, I hope that you members of the panel can assist bringing an end to the scandal of streaming, or there won't be any musicians left out with major artists. So that's a musician watching us and appealing to us for help. Jose Luis, could I ask you, very simply, we're running out of time, if there's a single lesson that we can learn from the Spanish model, what is it?
Well, I think a single message that we can find in the Spanish model is that finally the performers, they have their own voice, they can negotiate on their own for their own rights, and finally they can receive fair compensation. Not only the future performers, but non-future. John Smith, that is a good friend of us, he's right. All the performers, or most of the performers, are receiving nothing. Then the lesson that you can learn from Spain is that remuneration right is successfully in place since 2006 in our law. The remuneration right is arriving the performers, is recognized legally and practically, supported by directives. Oh, yes, you were close to that. And also, one part that is important, and they were saying before, is that the directive and the law that we have in most of the European countries is that about transparency. the lack of transparency in the distribution of revenues from the labels to the performers is huge. Nobody knows what money, why this month I receive this money, next month I receive half or double, and this is something that you as lawmakers, should also fix about the.
Okay, that's an excellent point.
Thank
so
you.
Can I pick up that point, please, with Maria? Now, you've talked about metadata, and many streaming services have dashboards for artists. Should streaming services have a legal obligation to make it clear to artists and composers on these dashboards exactly how much they're owed, addressing José Luis's point that there's no transparency and people actually have no idea how much money they're due?
Well, that would be lovely, but the relationship it's a contractual relationship between, first of all, the artist to the label, and then the label to the streaming service. So I don't think legally that would be possible, but what could...
Well, we've got the power to make recommendations as parliamentarians, whatever recommendations we want. We make law. So,
I mean, a way around it would be to give people, a grouping. So you would, instead of actually, because each of these agreements are under NDAs, and they're strict NDAs, which is part of the issue of transparency. But you could have with artist dashboards, you could have groups of income. You have earned this much this period. But remember the way it works, and that the fact that the income that is divided up on a monthly basis is by the number of streams that have happened against the income earned in that month. So some months you could have more streams, some months you could have less streams. This is where user-centric, I think, is something that really needs to be considered, because
I think all of us have heard that message loud and clear in the course of these hearings. Let me finish by just asking all of you to answer the same question. It's a question I ask on a regular basis here on the committee. I've asked all our experts if they think their industry will benefit from Brexit, but not one single expert so far think there's any benefit from Brexit. So can I ask each of you, Brexit good for the industry or bad for the industry? Maria.
Well, I think with no deal in place, very bad. With a deal in place, who knows? Because the main thing that's going to happen is the effect on the live music industry and tours. And, for many English artists, that is a huge amount of their income and a methodology to actually access different marketplaces. When it comes
I just pointed for Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish artists as well.
Yes,
Bobby, can I ask you the same question? Please. Brexit good for the industry or bad for the industry?
I can't see it being good. We have no deal at the moment, so I can only say bad. I go, COVID has already affected venues, performers, artists, agents, festivals, writers, management, and I'm now on top of this as well.
And it's a further hit. José Luis, yeah. Brexit, good or bad?
Yeah, it's difficult to say from Europe. We are very, very, very sad that you are out of the European Union. But I have to say technically that some rights, for performers may be in risk because you are not part of the European Union. But this is the only thing that I can say.
Okay. Thank you all for your brevity. Back to you, Chair.
Full house for you in terms of Brexit being bad. On that bombshell, we're going to conclude the first panel. I want to say thank you very much indeed to Maria, Kwame and Jose. We're going to take a short adjournment now for 2 or 3 minutes as we set up our second panel. Order, order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Order, order. This is Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and this is our second panel today in our inquiry into the economics of music streaming. We're joined by Fiona Bevan, songwriter and singer, Sweta Kinch, a jazz saxophonist, MC and composer, and Niall Rogers, a songwriter, producer and artist. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and thank you as well, Niall, as I understand you're in the United States as well, so thank you for that. Just one bit of housekeeping, if I may. Could you place yourselves on mute until you're called to answer? There's no sound interference, then, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Our first question is going to come from Steve Brine. Steve Brine. Steve Brine.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Could you're called to question?
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't unmuting my end. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know whether you've had a chance to listen to the evidence that has been given so far, either before or in today's session. But last week we had recording artists, Tom Ray, forming from Gomez, we had Ed O'Brien from Radiohead, and others talking to us about what they believe.
From Steve Brine. Steve Brine.
Right, okay. What they believe is very little transparency in the process. I just wonder, let's start with you, Fiona. Hi. Whether you believe that that's something you'd agree with, both as artists, both as songwriters, whether this is a process that is cloaked in mystery.
Yes, I would have to agree that the lack of transparency is a really, really big problem. I'm an independent artist as well as a songwriter for other artists. And so we've talked quite a lot on these sessions so far about artists and performers. So my big focus today is to talk about songwriters, but I can speak from both points of view. But yes, the lack of transparency, any songwriter will know that when they get their PRS statement and see the streaming income, it's all 0.00003 for this, 0.0005 for that. And in different countries, it's different amounts. We don't know the rates for each country because of the NDAs between the streaming platforms and the publishers and labels. And so, yeah, it's basically unauditable. And it's kind of incalculable because these tiny, tiny sums, well, I mean, you've probably seen some of the stats, but one of the stats that the IVAs have just published is that 8 out of 10 songwriters earn less than £200 a year from streaming. So we have a big problem here. And people don't know why they're getting so little. They don't know where it's coming from. There are many bodies taking a little cut along the way, if you look at dissecting the digital pound. So yeah, there's a lot to unpick there.
Okay, so then just as initial thoughts, Soweto, what are your thoughts? You're nodding there during that answer from Fiona. Transparency. You need to unmute, and but if you and Mr. Rogers unmute, then you'll be ready to roll.
Absolutely. There was some confusion in the first session as to whether this lack of transparency is by default or by design. Well, it's definitely by design, and it's something that I've seen throughout my career as a self-releasing artist, an independent songwriter, jazz musician as well. There are people with vested interests in keeping that system as opaque and unintelligible as possible, because if you don't know what to ask for, then you don't know how much you're entitled to. And that went back to the days when I wanted to put out a record myself, and people saying, oh, AP2 licenses and barcodes, as if it was really complex stuff, when actually it was just a couple of phone calls and emails away. I think there are still people with a vested interest in making you get the impression this is all really difficult to sort out, and it's all so polarized and dissipated that you'll never be able to collect all this revenue. Well, actually, it's never been easier to collect metadata. You don't have to go around to every pub that your song is played in. There is a digital trail for all of this music as it's being played on all these different platforms. So, I think we shouldn't have much time for these agencies sort of pleading poverty or that it's really difficult in this time of COVID, because one of the most egregious things is that my journey has involved going from being an artist with an independent label who could be guaranteed some royalties to relying pretty heavily on live gigs, live engagements, and selling my own merchandise, my self-released merchandise on my sets. With the complete dissipation, the evisceration of all my live gigs this year, that's no longer a possibility. Record labels have been trying to encroach on that live merch world for a while now with 360 deals, etc. And it just seems really pernicious to be complaining that it's more difficult for them when, as artists, we can't earn anything from live. As Fiona quite eloquently put out that stat that the MU and others have mentioned today, that 8 out of 10 musicians earn less than £200. Well, when apparently I think the top 3 labels have generated £4.2 billion this year, in the year of COVID, it just looks purely like market failure. It shouldn't be any other discussion other than how can that be right? And what sort of detrimental effects is that going to have on music creators, not just me personally and how I interface with it, but sort of what music from Britain sounds like. We'd never have a Kate Bush or a David Bowie in today's music ecology because it's very risk averse and there aren't people making those sorts of investments. And for an independently minded artist like that, you're making songs for playlists. You're making songs for a very narrow sonic wall. You're not making the sort of incredible musical risks that Bowie or somebody like Rod Stewart might have taken decades ago. So sorry for my rant, but holding that all in for an hour and a half.
I have a feeling that a number of things you just said will be making it into our final report, and there's some brilliant comments in there about market failure in particular. And then, Mr. Rogers, pleasure to meet you. Tell us your thoughts on non-disclosure agreements in the industry, your experience of them, and this whole issue of transparency, and whether you feel, without putting words in your head, that it is presented as all being very complicated, not something that artists need to worry their heads about, when actually, as Soweto says, it's not really that complicated at all.
No, I just want to simply say I've been doing this. I started with Sesame Street 1970 or 71. I've been doing this all my life. And I look at the record labels as my partners. And the interesting thing about my partners is that every time I have audited my partners, every single time I find money. Every time. So the thing is that we absolutely must have transparency. There's no, I mean, there should be a wonderful relationship between both parties. I mean, partners are happy when both parties are happy. And the only time that we really get to check to see if things are the way they should be is we go in and audit. And every single time, and I am not making this up for dramatic purposes or comedic purposes, but every single time I have audited a label, I have found money. And sometimes it's staggering the amount of money. And that's because of the way that the system was designed right from the beginning. With the way the system's set up now, with all of these relationships between the labels under NDA, and now we can no longer see. We don't even know what a stream is worth. I mean, does anyone, and I look at a very learned group of people here, can anyone actually really tell me what a stream is actually worth? Yeah, you can't. And there's no way you can even find it. There's no way you can find out what a stream is worth. And that's not a good partnership. I don't look at my record label partners as enemies. I look at them as my friends. I go to dinner with them. When I'm in the south of France and I see Lucien, we're the happiest people in the world. But at the same time, COVID has given me a real opportunity to drill down on my numbers. And I am completely shocked. I love what the gentleman said. I never thought about it that much because my touring revenue has been so substantial, I could support my entire organization. When we were on tour with Cher and we were going into lockdown, I gave all my band members and all my crew a big advance. I had no idea what was going to happen. And only a few weeks ago, I did the same thing. And that's because I'm in partnership with record companies for the rest of my life. So I do have a revenue stream that's coming in. But now that streaming has become the default mechanism when it comes to distribution, and we know it's a great one, so it's never going to go backwards, now is the perfect time to fix this stuff. And let me just say very simply, because I don't want to rant. I have a real problem with talking way too much. But I just want to say something. And this is just very sober from my heart. Right now, we see with the companies exponential growth. We see their numbers going up and up and up. Why? Because streaming is an incredibly effective way to distribute the product. As we have all learned in math class, this is simple, basic stuff. When you have continued exponential growth, mathematically, what's the next thing that happens? Explosive growth, right? You have explosive growth. That's what's on the horizon. Why not fix these problems now? Because they know that what's coming is explosive growth for the labels. They are going to make more. If you think they're making a lot of money now, what do you think they're going to make in 4 years? It's going to be astronomical. So now is the time. Make your partners happy. Like, let's go into a room, have an organization that represents songwriters and artists at the table and say, look, we love you guys. We're in business together for the rest of our lives. Let's make it right. Let's make it fair now, because your stockholders, your shareholders are going to be thrilled because you're getting ready to experience explosive growth in the next few years. Let's pay these people what they should have been making all along, and we're going to be one big happy family. Bingo and done.
Well, you're famously a very hopeful and positive person. which is great to hear. But how much hope do you have that that will happen? Because I mean, we are the Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the UK Parliament, and obviously we look a lot at football. Football is a massive business, and you know, the Premier League here in England is huge with huge revenues. The talent in that context is the footballers. The footballers are incredibly well remunerated. There is no market failure as far as they are concerned. I'm sure some would like more, but there's no market failure as far as they are concerned. They share in the bounty. How hopeful are you, Niall, that the vision that you outline will actually happen without change in statute, which is what we are obviously capable of proposing?
I'm extraordinarily hopeful because I think it makes sense. The difference is that when you're talking about sport, the player is played for what they're doing at that moment. With music and IP, what we get paid for is the thing that we do at that moment, but the fact that it's consumed well after we've done it. So, you know, when I was a kid and I studied music and I looked at my old heroes, you know, the ones that did well, who were the ones who got a job working for the church or working for a lord or working at court or you know, things like that. So we knew as musicians we were going to grow up pretty much being poor. Well, the thing that changed that paradigm was recorded music, was music that could actually be played while I'm not standing in that place, right? I mean, in other words, like I don't have to be standing where my music is being consumed. So we came up with a mechanism to remunerate me for not having to be in that place, but you still getting to enjoy what I do. You get to enjoy my work. That system has always been cloudy at best, but now we have a chance, a great opportunity, because we absolutely know, we all learn this in math school. We all learn this. We all learn that if you're in the knee of a technological curve and you're experiencing exponential growth, then the thing that follows exponential is explosive. That means it's going to go wham, way up. We are not going to go backwards. We watched this happen when CDs were introduced into the marketplace. We went from analog to digital. Once we entered this digital world and we could replicate something over and over and over and over again, and the quality stayed the same, oh my God, that was a huge, huge revolution. We're never going backwards. It's always going to get nothing but better.
Thank you. And just finally then, and it's interesting you talk about, you know, future-proofing, if you like. This is a moment to future-proof because, yes, you're right. The artistry that you guys put in is around for a long time after you have created it, unlike a sports professional, and that is only going to change as technology changes, isn't it? Because performances, and maybe COVID will be the instigator of this, performances will be on recorded tape, but who knows what technology will bring? Who knows what avatars of you, Niall, will appear at Glastonbury in the future, doing your craft? And there's a thought. And you know, how will you or your estate, God forbid, one day be paid for that?
You've just explained it perfectly. As the technology changes, and say, for example, that scenario you just described is the future. That IP should have a way of being, we should have a way of calculating it. We should have a way of understanding how the industry sets a price. And the best way that we would have an understanding is if we're sitting at the table, right? We need to represent ourselves. We need to have someone sitting there representing us. And I think we all know the reason why that hasn't happened, because it's a bit of a conundrum. The labels which own the recorded music, it's hard for them to fight for the people who've made the recorded music because it seems like you're fighting against yourself. but it's not really true. We are partners. And if you just sort of look at us as family, as it's artists are really at a disadvantage. And I'm just going to go off topic just for a moment. We're really at a disadvantage because all my life I've seen when, Mick Jagger walks in the room, or David Bowie walks in the room, or Diana Ross walks in the room, or Madonna, and we see the executives, we see the CEOs. It's a big smile on our face because we look at them, it's like they're the people who are looking out for us. They're the people that are our partners. They're taking care of us because artists intrinsically believe, not everyone, so don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to speak in absolute terms, but we intrinsically believe that we are in a good business. We're in a business of giving love and sharing art, and we believe that these people are in that business because they love the music and they love the people who make the music. If somehow they could just sort of turn around and see it from our side, and if they can't, let us have the power to have representation that can show them our side, that can speak for our side. And I think that things would be very, very different very quickly. And the outcome and the growth and the finances that everyone would make would be fine. Everybody would be happy. You don't have to have somebody way up here and we're way down here. That's just ridiculous. Why can't we come like this? And they're still going to make a hell of a lot more than we make, but still, if you can bring it a little bit more into balance, it would make a lot more sense and we'd be a lot happier. And why should we have to suffer the way we're suffering now? Half of my revenue is just out the window right now because of COVID. Nothing I can do about it. I'm not blaming anyone for that. But right now, if we had a better system and we had transparency, as I said, not one person could tell me what a stream is worth. Not one.
Thank you, Niles. I'm just going to say at this point, we have about an hour left of the session, so I'm going to ask for just a tiny bit of brevity, just in terms of answers and response, if that's okay. Steve, have you finished your questions, or do you do anything else?
Yeah, I just wonder whether Soweto wanted to add something to that. Yeah. He was itching in his seat there. I could feel it. But other than that, back
please, Soweto. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Just to expound on what you've eloquently described there now, if we are in a relationship with labels, though, often that relationship is abusive, and I can't underline enough how iniquitous the pro rata settlement that we have at the moment with songs are. That means the top 10 streaming artists get all of the miscellaneous revenue. In short, it produces ridiculous stats like 80% of subscribers on a platform like Deezer, their money goes to artists they've never listened to. Their subscriptions go to artists they've never listened to. Or a situation in which, as I said, if I create my magnus opus and thousands of people listen to it, not making it personal, but Dua Lipa, Ed Sheeran, the top 10 streaming artists get all of that money. Now, as Niall said, in a year that we're normally touring and got live revenues and T-shirt sales, you might not notice that. But in a year when all of that's dried up, how can it be right that we have a pro rata rather than a user-based agreement in which people could feel like they are supporting their artists more directly? And specifically with my genre, jazz music, 3 to 6% of its value is suppressed by this current model. If it was a user-based system, then alternative genres. And I can't underline how important these genres are. I was lucky to hear Mr. Rogers speaking about his own musical journey and loving bebop at a certain time. I've stayed in that zone as a jazz musician, but we wouldn't have the funk, the hip hop, the other genres that without musicians taking a left turn sometimes, without getting into avant-garde things that aren't just profitable in the short term, but work on their chops and develop a different musical ear. That, as I mentioned before, produces a Kate Bush or Rod Stewart, things that we can be proud of as a country. If that's not happening, then we're not going to hear those voices in the future. It's all going to sound very myopic, very narrow, and very similar.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our three witnesses for the music and the great pleasure you've brought to all of us over the years. Fiona, it's nice to see you again. If I could start with you. We've obviously heard in evidence about the split, that streaming revenue, 55% goes to the recording side, 15% to the song. Why do you think that is?
Well, it comes from an archaic split where the labels had huge physical overheads to produce vinyl and CDs, to store them and ship them. And we've heard about breakage as well during these sessions. Of course, very few people buy physical nowadays, and streaming has taken over utterly. And streaming has even supplanted downloads. So there's not really an excuse for these huge behemoth companies to have 55% when they don't have these physical overheads anymore. It's very cheap for them to distribute the music. So 15% is still going to the publishing. 15% is what the song itself gets, and 55% is the record, the recording. And that, to me, is at the very, very fundamental basis of the problem. Because if that was a bit more even, songwriters would actually be able to survive. Right now, they're driving Ubers. Hit songwriters are driving Ubers.
I was going to sort of answer my next question in a way. I was going to ask you, and I hesitate to ask you this question because you're not an up-and-coming songwriter. You're obviously a very well-established songwriter who's had very big hits. But what is the impact of that on people coming into the industry as songwriters, do you think?
Well, yeah, it's absolutely devastating. You know, I'm a guest lecturer quite often at universities. All these brilliant young students who are on commercial songwriting courses, popular music courses, they're all emerging from university with maybe £50,000 debt into this landscape which has been utterly decimated. And it's very difficult for me to say to them, yes, songwriting is a great career to go into, because as I've said, 8 out of 10 songwriters earn less than £200 a year. And, you know, I had a track on an album that was #1 very recently, #1 in the album charts in the UK. That track, and that was the fastest selling solo artist album of the year at the time of release. And that track has earned me about £100.
And what was your share of the song in that, Fiona? Are you able to tell us? Or
it was about 48%.
Right, okay.
So basically almost a 50-50.
Yeah. So basically the song had earned £200 effectively for songwriters.
Yeah, so songwriters are these invisible people behind the scenes who are actually writing the songs. I mean, often it's the artist as well, but if you look at the charts, the vast majority of music in the charts is written through collaborations and teams, songwriters and producers and artists together, or producers and songwriters together. And, you know, these are the most successful songs in the country and in the world.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of talk from independent musicians on the last session. But pop songwriters, the most successful songwriters in the world, can't pay their rent. So that's the depth of the problem.
Thank you, Fiona. Soweto, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because actually, the music publishing industry is dominated these days by the same corporations that dominate the record industry. I think I know the answer to this, but why do you think that it's turned out that they haven't been as forceful in pushing the interests for a share for their publishing arms as they have been for the record?
Well, they are behaving slightly like cartels, really, and the numbers of the ways in which their interests overlap and interleave are quite shocking once you discover them as an artist on the outside. The model for a jazz composer is actually quite interesting, and if you're independent, you'd be looking to pay splits to a composer, a band arranger, songwriters, lyric writers, etc. And it's, as Fiona implies, quite a team of people. And I guess the labels have a vested interest in diminishing that share, so they don't have to pay arrangers, composers, etc. And you could, I suspect, in the olden days, have a sustained career from being an arranger, from being a composer. When I myself do lectures and teach university undergrads to say, look, we need people in PR, we need people to organize, to curate shows and to arrange and compose. But if all of the income is either coming to the star performer or the back end in the label, then it doesn't make the idea of being an arranger professionally or a composer particularly viable.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Soweto. And I think it also in the origin of all of this, I think the record companies also had a stake in the streaming services themselves as well, probably, which is a reason why it might have been set up that way. If I could come to Niall, if is he still with us? Are you still there, Niall? I am. Oh, you are? Good. Right. Okay, I lost you there for a second. Sorry, Niall. Thank you, by the way. It must be very early in the morning where you are, but so thank you for joining us. Niall, I've read your autobiography a couple of years ago, and you've had an incredible life, and it's an extraordinary story. What's sort of motivated you to really want to speak out on this issue today?
So I feel that the UK is one of the most important musical engines in the world. I mean, you've read my book, so the first song I ever learned to play was the Beatles' Day in the Life. And I now am chief creative advisor at Abbey Road Studios. So I am very, very fond of the UK. Also, it's given me a second career. Ireland put chic back on the map, 15, 20 years ago, and it's been incredible ever since. But I would just like to say something, because you're right. It's really early in the morning for me, and if you know anything about musicians, I had to get up at 5 a.m., which was only about an hour after
You've been up all night. Tell us the truth.
Yeah, I had. Honestly. But I wrote this down before I fell asleep because I thought that this was really important, and I wanted my words to be sober and clear and not hostile, so you understand where we're coming from. This just hit me last night. A music stream should be treated as a license, not a sale. Think about that. This is really, really important. A license gives the artist 50% of the royalties for a song, whereas a sale gives the artist between 18 and 30%. So since streaming became the main mechanism for consuming music, record companies have unilaterally decided that a stream is considered a sale because it maximizes their profits. Duh. This hit me right before I fell asleep. Okay. It made all the sense in the world. In the old days, we would buy a CD, and that was a sale. That was something we owned, right? And there's a big difference. Or like those bicycles that are on the street that you can just put your credit card in and ride on the bicycle, but you have to return it. It's not your bicycle to keep forever. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to go off topic.
Okay.
Let me let me finish.
So, of course,
artists and songwriters need to update clauses in their contracts to reflect the true nature of how their songs are being consumed, which is via a license. They're not being consumed via a sale. It's consumed being a license, something that people are borrowing from. But meanwhile, we're getting the remuneration doesn't correspond to the action.
Okay. Thanks, Niall. I'm glad you were able to put that on the record for the committee. Can I just ask you just one last question? So I don't want to hog the time, and others want to get in. There's been a whole sequence of interesting developments recently with very well-established songwriters selling off the right to the future income of their catalogues, including the news that Bob Dylan's just done it, I think, this week, selling his for $300 million reportedly, and also, obviously there have been others recently, and you've been involved in working with a company that is sort of acquiring those sorts of song rights and future streams of income. What do you think is happening there? Is there a development going on that committee should be aware of why this is happening in this way at this time?
Yeah, I think that for the first time, artists are starting to realize that their songs need to be managed, just as their performances have been managed, just like the other aspects of their careers have been managed. And what we're doing, I don't know what Universal's doing, I can't speak for them, but what we're doing at Hypnosis is we're managing the songs. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the artist's songs perform at the peak of their, we want to make sure that artists are really being taken care of. Artists and songwriters are not fairly remunerated for their streams. The streams, like, it's as much as I love the convenience, the fact is the system. I tell you, it's 6 a.m. for me. The system is unfair. We need to have transparency, and if you can help us make this happen, things would change. And I guarantee you, 2 years down the road, everybody's going to be fine and happy, because I am telling you, we are going to experience explosive growth, mathematical explosive growth.
Thank you, Niall. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Just before I turn to Clive, Fiona, I just want to put a question to you. It's actually been, I was messaged by someone on my Twitter account just before, and they said they're a UK music manager. I've achieved 9 billion streams. It's not the platforms, it's the NDAs on the deals. Ban them. Agree or disagree?
I understand why businesses might need to have NDAs, but actually we are a global industry. You know, to me, every digital transaction, or whatever you want to call it, can be traced. It's digital. There shouldn't be any opacity, and if it's your work, why do you not know what's going on with it? It's extraordinary. But to me, yes, it's not necessarily a problem only with the streaming platforms, but the record labels, which have this huge hold on everything, because the major record labels also own the major publishers, and the value of the song itself has been suppressed and decimated. And the value of the recording has been raised up, and that's because of that archaic, to do with the physical manufacture, like I was saying before. So if we could just even out so that the song itself is valued. I mean, you know, I was saying this yesterday, I did a talk at a uni last night. You know, most people don't want to walk up the aisle to a beat. They walk up the aisle to a song. It's the lyrics, the melody, the beautiful chords, and that is, it's what brings all the value to the streaming platforms. It brings all the value to these huge companies. You know, when the shares get sold, they've grown enormously. Look at all that value. And it's all built on the foundation of these incredible songs. But the people who made these incredible songs are not being remunerated.
No, Fiona, yes,
really
I mean, this is it's a very constant refrain that we're going to, we do understand that point, but it's just in terms of NDAs. And as someone who's you know, who lectures in this subject, who is obviously, you know, who has perspective wider than just artistic perspective as well as an academic perspective, is the problem NDAs themselves, or can some NDAs be justified and perhaps they should be limited when it comes to stopping artists knowing exactly what their songs are earning them?
I think, what are they trying to hide? Why? Why would they be trying, you know, if you're not doing something wrong, why not let it all come out in the open? I think they probably feel a bit guilty, and they know there's something a little bit not right about what's going on. And I think that's why they're a bit afraid to actually open the books.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I love what Niall said, we are all a family, but okay.
No, thank you. Clive Efford.
Chair. So after we've finished our hearings, we'll write a report that will make recommendations to Parliament, effectively the government, and the government respond to those recommendations. So we've received in our written evidence calls for us to recommend that Parliament should limit the amount of time a corporate partner can recoup their investment against the creative's royalties, and limit the time that they can own a copyright, after which it should return to the composer or the artist. So is that a recommendation that you would endorse? It's a question that's open to all three of you. I can see Soeto's responding.
In the affirmative, yes, copyright should revert back to the creator after a fixed period of time, and you shouldn't be able to recoup costs that you haven't necessarily spent in perpetuity. So I completely support that.
The running joke in the music business ever since I've been in it all my life, I'm 68 years old, was, the music business is the only business where after you pay off the mortgage to the house, they still own the house. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make it. There's no other business on earth that does that. We pay back all the royalties, and they still own our property. It was like that. It's ridiculous. I mean, and this year when I attempted to buy my rights back, it was like, they offered me all sorts of money to keep my property. And of course, it's really brilliant why they would do so. Is because if you are now making deals with streaming companies, and believe me, these are very smart people, they know what's coming down the road. If you sell off all the assets, then the record company is worthless. If you sell off all those songs and all that stuff reverts back to the artist, and you go and you buy Universal, what are you buying? You need to buy Bob Dylan. You need to buy all of those things that exist. So it's a mess that can be easily cleaned up. And right now is the absolute best time for it to be cleaned up, because we know that the future, like they say, it's so bright, I have to wear shades. I'm wearing shades. I can't see.
So can I ask that you said that it would be simple to sort this out very briefly. What sort of formula would you put in place for working out when it should revert back to the ownership of the creative mind that's behind it?
Well, see, here's where I believe that negotiations should take place. If we're sitting at the table, we'd all figure out the proper way to do things. We come up with a formula. As I said, this is really simple to me. A great deal is when both partners leave the room happy. So we could sit down. I don't want to say that this is what the number should be and that's what the number should be. But if we were seated at the table and we're now discussing this, we can easily discuss the wrongs. And I think, because I know so many of the CEOs, I know them all. They're all my friends. That we can sit at the table and we can be honest and we can laugh and joke and we can say, whew, yeah, now, you really screwed me on that one. I bet you made we're adults. We're past that. But now from this point going forward, we have a very clear eye on what's going to happen in the future. And trust me, people, when I tell you, the future is incredible, because it was Fiona who brought it up, I believe. All of these things that we were subordinate to, breakages and returns and things like that, that's all gone out the window. Our contracts and all that terminology is still in place. It's meaningless now. Let's laugh about it, put it behind us, and say, this is what the future looks like. This is what your real expenses are. This is what your real growth looks like. Let's deal with real numbers. We can only deal with real numbers if they show us real numbers, because we're just making it up now. We're guessing at it. In the old days, I remember talking to Michael Jackson once, and he was trying to figure out a formula where he could have a pennies deal, where he would know what he was making all around the world, because the math was so unbalanced and he just didn't quite know where it was. And I said, Michael, that makes sense. That's your right. That's your property. You should know what you're making. I guarantee you, I'm thrilled to be on this committee, but I'm pretty sure you know what your salary is, you know what your worth is, you know what you're going to get paid, you know that, and you can audit. Auditing has always been our wonderful mechanism where we can go in and look at the end of the year and say, oh my God, I really made that much money? I had no idea, because we really are kept in the dark. And streaming, and it's not the streaming services. Let's clear this up. It's not the streaming services that we have the problem with. It's fantastic that they can distribute our product in such an effective, wonderful way and keep a great digital trail. It's the labels that are perpetrating this, and we need to really address this. And if you have the power to do it, because we don't, if you have the power to do this, we would be eternally grateful. Fiona said it so perfectly. What's there to hide? I think what they're hiding is the humongous difference between what the people who create the music, we make it. If we didn't make it, there would be no record company. But when you see the disparity between that, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And the thing that they know is that it's going to get even greater. And once it reaches those numbers, they'll have so much power that we can't fix it. Let's fix it now, because we know what's coming.
And just before Fiona comes in, so you'd say that it is the big three record companies that are the blockage to actually, coming to the solution that you've set out. No.
Absolutely. Unequivocally.
Fiona, so I think you wanted to...
Yeah, I wanted to explain why this is a constant refrain, because that was the comment while I was speaking last time. It's a constant refrain because this has been going on for a long time, and the situation is worsening all the time, because every day tens of thousands of new songs are uploaded to the streaming services. So they've got more and more content, and that actually drives the rate down per song. So actually this problem's getting worse every single day. And so during the pandemic, for example, we've got the whole nation staying at home, listening to more music than ever before. We've got these huge multinationals based outside the UK making these extraordinary profits. 4.4 billion revenue in the first 6 months of 2020 was the figure added up. It's like all the creators are forced to live on universal credit, because actually, even though the gigs are cancelled, hit songwriters should be able to live on their streaming income, but they can't. So that's why it's a constant refrain. It's an emergency. The UK government's actually picking up the bill. And I think it's quite shameful. And, there's a lot of anger and sadness, a lot of depression about this. And, I have great hope for the future as well. I think this is an amazing opportunity for the UK to become world leaders in how do you change this? How do you fix this? Data management, making things much more fair, the splits between the song and the record. It's a huge, wonderful opportunity.
And there are real practical consequences to this. Somebody created a football analogy earlier on. Well, it's as if the Premier League is literally cannibalizing, not even the Premier League, the top four, the big four, cannibalizing all of the other teams. And that means that there's no conduit for new talent. There's no lower league teams for players to develop their skills in. Someone like me as an artist, I don't need anyone to pontificate which label, major or minor, I sit in within the ecology. I just need a fair split for the music that I create. And I think there are many artists out there that you don't need anyone to lecture them on whether they're major, minor, or in between. It's just creating a system that is more of a level playing field, has more of the transparency that you described, Clive, so that I don't need to necessarily be friends with the people I'm coming to the table with to know that even if I'm an outsider to this, sometimes what feels like a bit of an industry cabal, that at least there's a base rate of being treated fairly as a creator.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Julie?
Hello. Fiona, last week we heard from Guy Garvey that he's edited his tracks to optimise them for streaming platforms. Do you think that's widespread in the industry, and has streaming influenced the way you write songs?
Yeah, that's definitely very widespread. Streaming's definitely influenced the way songs are written. I mean, technology has always affected, the form has always affected the content. But I do have to say that because of algorithms and algorithmic radio, certain types of music are being favoured over others, and it is making people think, well, if I'm going to pay the rent this month, I'm going to have to make music that sounds kind of exactly like that song that was really big. So we get this kind of extraordinary whitewashing of the variety, the cultural diversity, and it's actually homogenizing music in quite an alarming way. The other thing I'd like to say is that, Soweto can probably talk more about this, but, a stream is 30 seconds. That's what counts as a stream. If you click before 30 seconds, that doesn't count as a stream. So within 30 seconds, everybody's trying to grab the audience's attention. But, if you're writing a symphony, if you're writing a 9-minute-long jazz odyssey, that's, your 9 minutes still counts the same as a 31-second-long song. So there are lots of odd things like that which are really skewing numbers and really, really hitting income.
Do you think there's enough transparency in the way these algorithms, the way the music is selected on these platforms?
Well, there's no transparency about the algorithms. I mean, human beings make algorithms, which means that algorithms have, subconscious, unconscious bias, so there are very odd things about algorithms. They're deeply flawed because they're made by humans, and they favour some things over others.
So would transparency around that help, do you think? Or would it not make any difference?
I think there's a deeper issue there than transparency. I think we're talking about robot radio, which is, quite
we don't want that.
Scary. So I don't exactly know what to say about that. I mean, Soweto, you're nodding. Maybe you have something to say, or Niall.
And stylistically,
yes. Hi, Soweto.
Hello, Julia. With my hat, both as a jazz musician and as a hip hop artist, perhaps even more as an MC, if you want to get playlisted, there's a particular sort of format or the catchy hook, or you're writing for a particular aesthetic, in a sense. It doesn't reward people who are going to take risks. As Fiona mentions, create longer songs, longer form content. You're writing for a very quick, and if you like, disposable sort of sound. That's going to have lasting effects on the type of content that this country produces, and we should step in and intervene to make sure that there is diversity, to protect diversity.
Is that any different, just exploring that a second, is that any different than in the days where, getting on Radio 1 and getting played on Radio 1, they liked songs that were kind of 2.5 to 3 minutes long. Is it any different than that, or is it the same?
It is different because in the days before perhaps a Clear Channel or before the influence of streaming now, labels would invest. That's why I mentioned Rod Stewart and David Bowie. They invested in these artists in their first 3 albums. They weren't successful. You could afford to do bad numbers in your first or second or third quarter. Now, if you don't immediately hit those numbers, if you don't immediately make the playlisting cut, then you can be dropped and they'll cut all of that investment.
Okay. And moving on to Niall, you've said yourself you've been performing and songwriting for a long time. How has your performing and songwriting changed in response to the rise of streaming throughout your career?
Well, I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to answer your question. It's because that's just trends. You're in whatever the current zeitgeist is. Hopefully, if you're a good, passionate artist, you respond to that and you do whatever you do. I just want to say that, and I really want to leave you with this because this is really why I'm here. Artists and writers are not remunerated equally. They do not get their fair share of the pie. And regardless of what songs we're writing and how long they are and this and that, that's just the world.
Can I just explore that a little bit? Because we've had evidence around non-featured artists So, you know, the headline artist will get remunerated. You're saying unfairly, I think I agree with you. But the non-featured artists, do you think the position's even worse for them?
Well, absolutely. But that's, you know, that's a question of deals and what an artist is willing to do. And there'll always be these different types of negotiations. I'm very old school. I used to take an attitude of we're all partners. And, you know, maybe it's because I'm an old hippie. But, you know, to me, honestly, if there were 2 or 3 people in the room and we're writing, we're partners. It's easy. I like easy deals. I don't want to fight over, you wrote that word and you wrote this word. That's not where I'm coming from. What I really want to look at is the bigger issue. And I am so honored to be talking to this committee because I know I'm the outsider, but this affects us all. If the UK is a leader and says this can be fixed, because honestly, I hope that you can understand that I am not I'm not some wacky person. I'm not overly angry. I'm not that guy. I just want fairness. I am a 2-time cancer survivor. I understand the value of life. I understand being fair with your partner, being fair to your friends. Music is a gift. You know, we're all slaves to this. Whatever we're complaining about, we're still going to get up tomorrow morning and write songs. We can't help it. We cannot help it. And we want you guys to like it, and we do it for you, but we really do it for us. I really need to stress this point one more time, and I'm going to get out of here because this is so important. There's never been a better time. If we were sitting in the room with the big CEOs, and believe me, I'll write the mathematical formula out for them, and I guarantee you they understand it, and we can see where this business is going, and we deal with NDAs, and we sit there and we look at the math, the same math that we learned in school, and we see where this business is going. Everybody's going to say, okay, well, yeah, you know, I could live with that. I mean, that's a pretty good number that I am going to get over the next 10, 15, 20 years, or however long they're going to stay in the business. This can now be a great paradigm shift for songwriters and artists all over the world. Things would change so much. You know, I love when you brought up the fact that in the old days, David Bowie, I brought this up to someone yesterday. I was talking about the group Los Lobos, and they were on Warner Brothers. And Los Lobos didn't get dropped. They would put out record after record, and they would never hit. And then the movie about Richie Valens came out, and they did the soundtrack. And then all of a sudden, Los Lobos was the thing. The record company knew it. They knew that they should invest in them. They knew that they should hold on to them because one day they'd pay off. Right now, the situations that we have are so crazy and so unfair that if we got into an economic formula, and first of all, I'm going to say this one more time. I want to know what the hell a stream is worth, what it really is economically. Just show me the number so I could sit down with my accountants and we can go over real numbers. Because right now, even though I love the way Spotify gives me the stats and all that sort of stuff, I don't know what's on the other side of that wall. I don't have a clue. So you can tell me I did a billion of this or 750 million of that. 750 million of what?
Yeah,
a billion of what?
You've made your point very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come back to a point that you were talking about a moment ago in terms of algorithms. Isn't it the difficulty sort of twofold in terms of algorithms? First of all, you discussed the homogeneous nature, and I think Soweto as well mentioned this, of music as a result of the algorithms, that effectively we lose that diversity because they pick up on music which is quite general in form. That's, to a certain extent, that's not a bad thing for a global company in terms of these record companies, because if you boil it right down, they can market it to more people. So that sort of it's something that seems quite unpleasant to us who like diversity of music, but from a purely business perspective, it probably makes some sense that they have this sort of these algorithms work in the way that they do. What do you think?
I think that's counterintuitive. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think that's actually.
Sorry, is that for me?
Do you want to go first, Sweto, and then Fiona?
Okay. I think that's actually counterintuitive, because if there is this diverse musical ecology, then there'll be the next fad, the new thing that they can then hive off and then celebrate the next. But if that's not happening, then you just have homogeneity, you just have bland, you just have the things that are risk averse. And music requires risk, certainly the type of music that I'm involved in, the type of music I'm inspired by. The ramifications for that culturally, I don't even want to get into, but in the purely business model terms, it's a terrible idea to merely restrict the sort of algorithmic sonic wall that we have around us.
Fiona?
I would just add to that and say, the UK has some of the most wonderful songwriters and composers in the world, but they're not being allowed to shine on the world stage if this homogenization is just absolutely clamping down on all that creativity. We would never get the Beatles nowadays. They wouldn't make their way through that algorithm. And I have to say, algorithms are like radio, and I would say that does make it sound like a license. But that's just harking back to an earlier point.
I get that. In terms of, just to follow up on that then, in terms of radio autoplay effectively, whenever I'm on my Spotify, I listen to the music I want to listen to, and then if I've not changed to something else I want to listen to, it starts playing something else, the autoplay function, if you like. Are the rates, do we know if the rates are different for if you're played during that autoplay, therefore you're subject to an algorithm, or if someone actively seeks out your music, Fiona?
As far as I know, the rates are the same, but I have to say the rates are different for the people listening for free compared to if you're paying premium. The rates are different in every country. So actually my answer to that question is we don't know the answer to that question. Nobody knows because of these NDAs which we talked about.
Yeah.
Also the maybe nefarious but certainly opaque relationship with playlisters, much like radio pluggers back in the day. The amount of leverage that they have or connection they have to make sure your record gets heard, algorithms or not, is something that should have more transparency around it. We should.
So there's like influencers, aren't they? Like social media influencers, except on Spotify and Apple Music. Is that
right?
Is that what the character is? Is that a fair characterization?
They get your song the traction that it needs to get heard and get the streaming numbers, but without them, you're stuck in the mire, and that's not necessarily an equitable or sustainable situation.
What do they get out of it?
A cut, I believe it's called.
Another middleman.
Yeah, a slice of the pie. And depending on how much work they do for you, then that differential goes up or down. But I think that is the problem inherent in it. Once they've got too much power to decide what's heard or what's not heard, then all sorts of diverse and interesting music is invisibilized, and we need to stop that from happening.
Is it more? I will move on to Heather in 1 second, but is it more sort of worthwhile? Is it more? It seems to be it's the same rate if it's autoplay as opposed to being actively sought. But in some ways, that's actually wrong, isn't it? Because if you are an artist and someone goes and actively seeks out your song and your music, that connection is deeper, is it not? And therefore, should the reward not be greater as a result? Fiona?
Well, someone has just texted me and said it's a different rate for algorithmic plays.
Okay.
But it has been proven that all these huge Spotify numbers don't necessarily translate to deep fan relationships. And it maybe is because of this huge algorithmic placing. I mean, someone said on the last session that 60% of people listening to a platform like Spotify end up going into those playlists that just roll and roll and roll. So no, there's not a deep relationship. But
Thank you. Heather Wheeler? You're muted, Heather. You're muted, Heather. Oh, she's gone. It's got the ceiling. You're still muted. Great.
Try that. Is that any better? Marvellous. There you are. All things come to those who wait. So, in the last session, we had talked about how streaming disproportionately particularly affects jazz and classical music. So, Soweto, have you had to actually mitigate this yourself? And I'm trying to work out how on earth you would do that with jazz stuff. But also then, if it has had real effects on you, are you having to be more reliant on live performances?
Yeah, there's so many ways in which the current streaming ecology really damages me as a jazz musician. As I mentioned earlier, it deflates the value of our genre by 3 to 6% because of both this pro rata thing and versus a user-based way of paying, subscribers paying, and because of the algorithms. I think also the way in which I make an album as an independent jazz musician as well, it's quite a hefty investment. For my last album, it was a big band album. It takes a lot of compositional chops and time in the recording booth, as well as all the PO and all the stuff that you self-finance. The sort of economics make less and less sense when you're only going to get a slither of that back on your royalties or your streaming royalties. There's less of an incentive, if you like, to create that bigger body of work or that more taxing sort of music. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But the live performances, I mean, right. Obviously we've got the problem with COVID, but did you see that this was ramping up and so you were going to have to, or not exactly write off the Spotify money, but, know that doesn't even buy the Christmas presents,
It's been a journey.
Probably pays your TV license. Marvellous.
It's been a journey, as I maybe intimated earlier, over the past 15 years of expecting a small but not negligible sum from record labels, royalties, and PRS, realising that wasn't happening, given the situation Kwame described earlier, piracy and that situation in the mid-noughties. So okay, live music is where we'll do it. We'll make all of our money from record sales on the road. The labels suddenly stepped in and decided they wanted 360 deals and to have a finger in that pie. And since then, we've sort of been battling it out in that ground. 2020 being a year of not touring at all and not selling any merchandise suddenly reveals to you the shocking iniquity of the current streaming setup. As I mentioned, £4.2 billion paid out to the top 3 labels this year in a situation where 8 out of 10 of us aren't getting 200 quid a year. That can't be right. That can't. And it says, I think also £600 million in bonuses were paid out to the top 5 label executives. There's clearly enough money sloshing about in the pie. And what could be done with that? How would it be funding new musicians coming through? How would it be funding singer-songwriters, composers, musicians, arrangers to do their next magnus opus? Because if not, it's just demoralizing and it keeps Britain's cultural, certainly climate stunted, Needs
brilliant, thanks. I mean, there aren't that many brilliant things that have come out of COVID, but I think we've managed to find another one. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Alex Davies-Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us this afternoon. It's been an incredibly insightful session and really, really worthwhile, so thank you all for your contributions. We've talked a lot about Spotify and the streaming services, the sort of mainstream streaming services, but do you think that the user-centric platforms like Deezer or even the artist-owned platforms like Tidal are a fairer model than Spotify? I'm not sure who wants to come in there. It's open to all of you.
Well, I personally think user-centric would help niche music, it would help local music, it would help independent artists. I think they would still need to make sure there was more transparency. I think they would perhaps have to get away from that market share thing whereby the biggest label gets the biggest chunk of the money, because that's why when you listen to your favourite Aberdeenshire singer-songwriter, the money actually goes to Beyonce, much as I love Beyonce. But so I think as long as there were certain things put in place, user-centric could be a beautiful scenario and could help a lot.
Yeah. So what did you think, you as a jazz musician, that those platforms would benefit you more, given the difficulties you've expressed with your genre?
Hugely. I'm the sort of musician, both as a jazz musician and I guess what's called alternative hip hop artist. There is a tremendous loyal fan base that loves my stuff out there and will support it, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the streaming revenue. So I'm not looking to compete with a Drake or Madonna or anything. As much as I love those artists, it ain't gonna happen. It's a bit late for me. But I have got a loyal but passionately, how jazz musicians and jazz fans can be particularly loyal and attached to a particular aesthetic, and that deserves its own model of remuneration, I think. Moving forward.
Definitely. And then coming to social media, so we've all heard about how YouTube and TikTok have blown up and really changed music and how people are accessing new music. What do you think the impact of social media companies has been on your music? Maybe Niall, if I ask you.
Well, I think it's been positive as far as the consumer is concerned, right? The consumers now are having probably the time of their lives. I mean, if I were a young person right now coming up, I now have access to more music than I've ever had before. But there's something else I wrote down before I went to bed last night, because I knew my brain cycles would be not exactly on point this morning. Another great concept. Why not move to a broadcast rate of payment to musicians for passive listening? This is, I think, what Ms. Wheeler brought up a few minutes ago, because we were talking about, anyway, so the broadcast rate, now please listen to this, the broadcast rate is appropriate for compensating artists and songwriters for music that has been streamed to consumers without them searching for it, right? Not the lower sale rate. Also, streaming services should be more transparent with data about when users have actually searched for a song versus when they've listened to it passively via an algorithm or a playlist. Yeah. I mean, I'm acting like I can call on people. Yes.
Yeah, if you're not Fiona, yeah, come on in, yeah.
But I mean, these are simple things, really simple things that we can do that would change things substantially. It would make a huge difference. And it's easy to do this.
I just wanted to add that, even if we went to another model like user-centric, at the moment, to me, the deepest problem is the fact that the labels and publishers don't have an even split of the revenue, which is making the song so undervalued, which is just decimating the grassroots of every avenue into music, really. So until that is kind of evened up as much as possible, so instead of 15-55, more like 35-35 in an ideal world. And the record labels will say, well, we have huge overhead still in developing artists. And what I would say to that as a songwriter is that songwriters spend a lot of their own time and energy and money unpaid, because we don't get paid to go to work. We get paid solely on royalties. So we're actually taking the risk, and we're actually developing the artists for free for the record labels. We're taking the risk, and we're not getting paid for it. So, yeah, it's a constant refrain. But I just wanted to say that again about if that record label publisher split was more even, then that would really help with a lot of these problems.
Yeah.
We have fantastic revenue collection organizations, as I mentioned earlier, PPL, PRS. If the split was more equitable rather than it is at the moment, 80-20 towards the labels and the song, then it's really cutting out an entire ecology, as mentioned, of songwriters, composers, arrangers that could live comfortably off of a 50% as opposed to 20%, So it's just tweaking a system that we actually have and that was created to protect these creatives in the first place.
Exactly correct.
Yeah, I agree. What I'd like to explore a bit more on the social media impact that has had on your music. We hear a lot about the social media companies, and one of the arguments that they'll throw us is that they're giving the artists and the songwriters exposure, so that outweighs sort of the effects of the safe harbour on copyright. Is that something you'd agree with? Do you recognise that exposure outweighing the rights?
Super brief, but I've definitely been on the bad end, if you like, of new platforms like Instagram, basically invisibilizing posts because they don't meet their algorithms, or they don't pass, they're a bit too polemical, or not the kind of music they like, particularly political songs or things talking about COVID. And that's really worrying. I had a long chat with Loki, another rapper who does things and talks about subjects like this, and he won't be able to do it. The freedom that he had on a YouTube 10 years ago has gone now. And it's, if you want to have promoted content, you have to be in there. It seems with a tiny cabal of people that get to let your stuff go through, you see. Sorry, Fiona.
No, Fiona.
Well, yeah, I wanted to say we can't pay the rent with exposure. You know, for an artist who's on a big label and they get huge exposure, it's wonderful. They get branding deals with huge companies, and you know, and they go on huge tours and sell merchandise. And everybody who's further down the chain, like the songwriters, are not actually getting any income from that exposure. They're not getting any income from the branding. They're not getting any income from merchandise. We only get 4% of live. So no, it's not good enough. And, you know, I know TikTok's recently been in the news a lot and hopefully that's being sorted out. You know, music has been utterly devalued. Why is it being used for free? I recently had a tech company trying to use one of my songs on an advert for free. And it's like, actually, for a song to be on an advert is one of the few revenue streams that's actually still there. And that has also gone down and down and down because it's the only revenue stream, and they know that they can all undercut each other. So we're in quite desperate times, and it's quite serious. And yeah, it's an emergency.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Chair. No more questions from me.
Thank you. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we've had some incredibly memorable lines throughout the course of this hearing. I was particularly struck, Fiona, when you said that 8 out of 10 songwriters earn less than £200 a year. Extraordinary. And Soweto, I'm a great fan of jazz, and I still listen to 78 records on jazz, as well as 33s and Spotify as well, but there's nothing like 78 records for that fabulous old jazz sounds. My great-granduncle was a jazz musician in the 1930s in New York, and I've inherited all of his jazz collection, 78s, and I play it in a fabulous old 78 player. So I was interested that you said that you really relied on tours and on merchandising. I imagine you've been hard hit this year because of COVID.
Absolutely. I've been as resourceful as I can. I did an online festival, which involved going to different locations, filming them and doing all that sort of stuff. But the same sort of love of collecting and you describing it and putting a 78 on and the sign of crackle, that's what, you know, keeps that attachment of jazz audiences there, and they'll come to a show and want a signing and want some physical, you know, reminder of the fact that they were at a show at a particular time. Another thing that we haven't discussed is how maybe it's not user-centric, but artist-centric models of hosting your music on these streaming platforms could be there, so that I could offer something that's more bespoke to a listener, if not a signed stream, some higher level broadcast quality WAV file, some other level of interaction. And there's no ability to set your own prices as an artist on streaming platforms. You get told that's what.
Given how important touring is for you, what effect is Brexit going to have on you?
It's the insecurity around it. That's always been the problem, and promoters not quite knowing if they can go ahead and book tours and so forth. So the insecurity around it is the biggest thing. Tariffs don't necessarily affect us to the same degree, but there will be an implication when there is physical merchandise on sale at these places. So it's affected us already in lots of cultural ways, but I think there's an opportunity to still do good work after Brexit. It's really when there's clarity that'll be the case.
I see you nodding away to that.
And if not to sound.
Yeah, I wanted to say something else about Brexit, which hasn't really been covered so far, which is, if we were still going to be part of the EU, we would, as songwriters and music creators, we would be protected by the EU Copyright Directive, which would protect our IP. And actually leaving the EU and the UK, the last government deciding to not uphold that in UK law is a terrifying prospect for music creators. But it's also an opportunity for the
Tell
UK.
us why.
Because we're going to be worse off than our EU colleagues that we write with. We're going to be absolutely unprotected by those laws. Those, the safe harbour, everything has been addressed with the EU Copyright Directive. Pretty good legislation, and we're actually outside of that now. We need more protection. Our IP needs protection, and I think the UK actually has an opportunity to kind of beat the European legislation. Why not make it even better? If we're free from those constrictions, it's a chance to protect creators even more. Music's one of the biggest exports of the UK. It's one of the things we're most famous for in the world and most proud of, the diversity of it, the extraordinary things that come out of the UK. And we don't want to see that devastated. We want to see that cultural richness and diversity, not just the bank of mum and dad allowing people to make it through and make music. We need to really protect our creators, and it's a chance to do that. It's amazing.
Soweto.
Yeah, just to tie on from that, that's money that's being drained away into supranational, opaque multinationals, and not your constituents. It's being driven away from people in this country who pay their taxes and stimulate more musical and cultural growth. And so even, not to sound a jingoistic note, post-Brexit, it kind of makes no sense to have this leverage now to be able to create our own laws and to be siphoning off money to supranational companies abroad.
Okay, back to you, Chair.
Directly.
Thank you, John. Niles, just finally, we've heard a lot during the evidence sessions about contracts between artists and record companies. Effectively how the sort of one-size-fits-all at the start of a career, such as, we talked about breakages, NDAs, etc., etc. How big do you have to get in order to not be subject to that, to be able to effectively put your own terms across, to get a better deal?
You're always going to be subject to that. The bigger you get, the more leverage you have, but I think Fiona hit on it earlier, and I reiterated. It's all about transparency. If we can get rid of the NDAs, or at least we absolutely need to have a place at the table to see what's going on with these deals, to see what we create, what that's worth, what that's actually generating. And once we know what those numbers are, I believe that we can all sit down at the table and come up with formulas that are beneficial to all parties. I think that we've lived in a world, of course it felt better for us, a long time ago when we were younger, and it felt a hell of a lot better for us before COVID. But now that we've had a chance to sit down and look at our lives and see the impact COVID has had upon us, we then go back to the thing that we thought we could really depend on, our royalties, the things that we've done before that people still love and listen to, sometimes more than the stuff that we're creating now. I stress this, and I can't stress this enough. We have a great opportunity. Right now is the time, because when we sit down with pencil and paper and we can actually draw a timeline into the future, we could look at the growth. We could look at this growth curve that we're on, and it's clear. It's not magic. We can look at this growth curve that we're on, and we can say, if we just stay on that, we can pretty much figure out what the big companies are going to earn. If we just stay on that curve, we can say to them, you could chop off this bit and give it to the people who keep you alive, and you're still going to do fantastic. You're going to see numbers that are just absolutely off the charts.
But Niles, if I may, just to clarify that there is a route where artists can get a better deal. It's basically just being hyper successful, if you like, a sort of Ed Sheeran type of situation. But is it fair to say that route is narrower than it used to be?
I don't know whether it's narrower or not. I can't really tell. Look, I've been in that position where, I've gotten, big records, and I get these massive checks that come from nowhere, and you go, wow, where did that come from? I understand that. But that's not real life. The real record business, the real music business is this wonderful mosaic of all types of music. And in the old days, just to explain it to you, in the old days, they used to say, the people, when I would have my good runs, they would say, oh, you're paying the rent on this building. And these were all just sort of little joke phrases, but they actually had meaning. That the people who were performing at the top were actually carrying the people at the bottom, because we all were one big family. You didn't drop those people because they didn't do well. Someone mentioned, David Bowie's and the Beatles. You didn't drop them because you knew at some point in time they'd pay off. So right now we have a situation that is so financially viable and so how can I say it, that the future is so clear, because all of those things that used to be a hindrance in the past have gone away. It's just gone away, and they're not coming back. So now we can say, here we go, we're family, let's sit down, let's be fair. Everybody is not going to be Ed Sheeran. Everybody's not going to be Dua. That's just the reality, and we all know that. And even Dua won't be Dua soon. When I first got into business, someone told me, they said, you know what, Niall, here's what you got to do. You need to learn to embrace failure, because as great as you're doing right now, and it's true, when I started out, every record I put out was a hit. I did not have one flop. But when that day came and I had a flop, I had nothing but flops until I met David Bowie. I was just flop after flop after flop. But the one thing I learned was, if you learned how to deal with that type of roller coaster that we're inevitably going to be on for the rest of our lives, it's okay. We love being in this business. And if we have a fair and equitable business, we can get through the hard times as well as enjoying the great times. And it's always going to be up and down. So as I said, we have never had a better time to deal with this issue, because now you can sit down and look at somebody, and let's just say that all they're focused on, and I don't want to believe this, but let's say all they're focused on is the money. Right now you can sit down and say, hello, this is what you're going to make in the next 10 years, the next 15 years. Isn't that fantastic? Why don't you just shave off a little of this and do it in a way that protects us, that we can see what the numbers are, and it opens up a system that for the future will be better in the long run for everybody. The more we know, the easier it'll be for us to work. Imagine the creators if they knew the cost-benefit ratio of what you're putting into a project, and you can sit there and go, God, I'm making this big band jazz record, but if I don't know what I'm getting paid for streaming, so the record could be a massive hit. And guess what? I just lost money because I don't even know what anything is worth. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No. Kevin Brennan's actually just messaged me to say you're very much on message, because one of your biggest hits was We Are Family by Sister Sledge, I believe. So,
yes, it was.
But thank you. And thank you, Niles, for your evidence today. Thank you, Soweto. And thank you, Fiona. It's been really excellent. Thank you. Order.
Thank you so
Order.
much for having us.
Thank you.